On sale this month from our daddy, The Magic Order Issue 2.
Nemesis Reloaded, Issue 2, art by superstar Jorge Jimenez. And Nightclub Issue 3 for the staggering price of $1.99.
Starting in March, also my birthday.
The Ambassadors, a 6-pack series from Dad and the 6 biggest artists in comics. Frank Quitely, Carl Keshrell, Travis Charest, Oliver Couple, Matteo Buffoni, and Matteo Scalera. The world's first superhero has been created, but she's not Metropolis or Gotham City. She's in Korea, and she wants to share powers with the best of people from every major country.
This is Willy Wonka with superpowers. Don't miss it.
Can you hear me? Perfect, I can hear you beautifully. So, how's it going?
Yeah, all right. What was that? Well, you went to a demo on the 15-minute city?
Yeah, it's bonkers. Like, you know this sort of insidious thing that's been happening where nobody voted for it. It was in nobody's manifestos. And suddenly all the cities are getting carved up into 6 Hunger Games style districts and everything, you know? The big thing that they're doing in my neck of the woods, which is crazy, is that once this is all operational, you know, if you leave your zone in your car and enter another zone, which we do to take the kids to school, right?
Yeah.
You will be fined £70 if you do it more than twice a week, each time you do it. So I was talking to a girl tonight who said to me that her son's broken his ankle, right? And she has to drive him to school. And she said she'd have been fined £1,000 this week just for going on the school run. Yeah. So everybody's up in arms about it, but every council's singing from the same hymn sheet. It's the weirdest thing, you know, all across the Western world. You know?
Yeah. So that's quite worrying. Were many people there?
Not that many, you know. I mean, you know what it's like. Like the good causes are the unfashionable causes, you know. So like, as ever with these things, it was old people. There was quite a few old people because they were like, I don't like the sound of this, you know. Whereas, you know, young people tend not to be that interested. You know, they've somehow managed to make this into something that's authoritarian as opposed to anti-authoritarian, you know. So the Guardian ran a piece this week talking about it, saying the 15-minute city's most beautiful idea, and there's, you know, crazy right-wingers are against it, and it's like, hang on,
all right,
surely it's more far right to lock people up in their zones and you're not allowed to leave your zone.
we're in newspeak territory, aren't we?
And it's quite hard because the narrative is a powerful one, you know, and 15-minute city sounds so lovely, doesn't it? You think, my God, everything's just going to be 10 or 15 minutes walk from my house. But who's opening these businesses? You know, who's going to open a business where there's a 15-minute footfall? You know, it's fantasy.
Yeah. Well, you know who's behind it, don't you? The usual bunch of fuckers.
Well, nobody voted for them. That's this weird thing.
Well, exactly. That's it, isn't it?
Yeah, so if you don't vote them in, you can't vote them out. Like, I always forget 80% of the world doesn't live in a democracy. And even the 20% that think we don't, really, you know. Yeah. What a strange start to our...
You're recording this?
Yeah, I think this is interesting, isn't it? You know, so... But it's funny, I was thinking about you today, and I think you kind of, you know, when you're the artist, you never actually think about the audience as such. You know, you're so involved with the page, you don't think of who's reading it. And I always think you're one of those classic guys who doesn't realize your influence, you know, like because you're just sitting with a pencil and you don't think about it, you know. Yeah. I was thinking about you, and I think of just the conversations that I've had with artists over the years, and everybody cites you, see, especially the British guys. You know, it's kind of like Alex Toth, you know, like the really smart guys will say, oh yeah, I'm into Toth, you know, and it's the same thing. The guys who really understand how to put a page together, you know, and it's the same with the best artists here who've always been into you, you know. In terms of your influence, it is crazy. You know, you see you in Jamie Hewlett, you see like Sean Phillips told me that he would draw the Judge Dredd helmet and try and make it look a bit like yours and everything, you know, and Duncan Fegredo, obsessed with you. Grant, obsessed with your stuff for years, you know, you've obviously been a huge influence on Grant, you know, and John Wagner said to me once you were up there as, I mean, Judge Dredd said some of the greatest artists ever, and he said you're in his top 2 or 3, you know. Yeah. So do you feel it, or do you know, because you always seem so humble, you know?
Well, it's not that, it's just that you never get any feedback, so you just think I'm sending, you know, messages in a bottle and nobody's reading them, so you don't, you know. So
especially in the
I mean,
70s.
I am aware of the audience when I do a page, though. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm in the entertainment industry,
Mm-hmm.
and the art's a performance in a way.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Who do you see the reader as in your head? Like, what does that person look
Well, I
like?
just have me when I was 14 or something,
Right.
or 16, just,
Yeah.
it's somebody who's coming awake and is, things, the idea of the strange attractor, that song or that movie or that, those specific things that are like little beacons that draw you out.
Yeah.
So, like, what 2000 AD was when it first came out, suddenly all the kind of freaks went beep. What's that? Started heading towards it.
And very quickly as well, didn't they? I mean, everybody in pre-internet, there was no like.
It's weird, that, isn't it? Yeah, that's so strange. How I would know so much about what was going on, yet there was no internet.
Yeah, and
you have your own kind of web, don't you? And if there's a perturbation on the web, you kind of.
And it's not even as if there was many pals who were into this stuff as well, because it was always quite rare to find a pal who loved this stuff too.
Why, well, I had Brett Ewan, so me and Brett were, like comics, because we were in a working class. We come from working class background.
Yeah,
couldn't possibly be caught reading a comic once you're past the age of 7 or something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have the shit kicked out of you.
See, I was going to ask you about that, though, because I think there's another thing we work. I mean, I grew up in a housing estate as well, a working class kid. My parents were both blue collar. But I think there's a lack of judgment as well, like in working class households that see middle class friends. Like they would say to me, "Oh, I had to throw out all my comics." My mum and dad said I was too old for them and everything. But my mum and dad were just like, "Yeah, if you like it, cool." Like, do you not think working class people, they don't worry about things like that?
Well, my feeling growing up was that I was in a hostile environment and I had to keep a low profile and learn how to run really quickly. They were the two sort of skills you needed to get through. Also, because we were an immigrant family, like the Irish then were like Muslims now, because there was war going on in the north.
Yeah.
IRA were letting bombs off and killing people and stuff. So there was all that, that sort of stress about, you kind of sympathetic to the cause of republicanism because that was the Irish position. But at the same time, you were against the killing. So there was, so I had to keep a low profile about all that stuff because you couldn't, if Cockneys hated the Irish, it fucking mix. The mix. So I was totally denounced all that stuff when I was, when you're at home in your family, it's all Irish uncles, Irish aunties, and everybody stops to watch the Val Doonican show. But when you go outside, you're then confronted with the British system, class structured, and I think it might be different in Scotland. I think if you're in England, there's that highly stratified culture.
Yes.
So I thought, like when you decide at a sort of age where you can make an aspiration to do something, like mine was to be a comic book artist. That's something you have to keep to yourself. To be an artist from a working class background, like particularly an Irish one, was like almost like wanting to be a ballet dancer or something.
It's funny though, because at the same time there's such a working class arts thing as well, though, isn't there? Like, I mean, in my housing scheme where I grew up, there would be like a guy who looked rough as hell, but he was a brilliant painter or something, or I remember getting into some guy's house and these guys were like crazy guys, they used to steal cars and everything. But I remember being in the house and seeing the complete works of Michael Moorcock and everything as well. So there's a lot of surprises, like people who aren't working class like us, there's a lot of surprises, isn't there? It's not like Shameless, it's like there's really, really smart people who maybe just don't have any cash. That's the truth of it, isn't it? Like, did you find a lot of people like that to hang out with, or were they?
Just me and Brett was sort of were, we both collected American comics. That was a big thing. And Brett was a bit ahead of me in terms of like reading Penguin modern classics. Like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre. And then in the back of the Penguin classics, you'd get if you like this book, there's these other authors, and then we go out and get those authors. Somehow came across William Burroughs, and then you come across, Moorcock was a big one, but there was all that, that you were sort of self-educating until you got to college, and then it's quite weird now, isn't it, when you walk into bookshops like whatever, Barnes and Noble or whatever they are in London, and you'll have cult fiction. They've actually got a section now for the stuff you had to find yourself and never heard of. Now it's all just, here's Hunter S. Thompson, here's Aleister Crowley, here's them all in one section.
Yeah, and everyone's heard of them now. It used to be like one kid at school knew this stuff, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest things I was thinking about the other day was the Dewey the Dewey system in the libraries where they the numbering for different sections. Yeah. Well, the 133 section in the library was all the weird stuff. Right. Flying saucers, Colin Wilson books, and then you got magic and all that stuff. And I think I read every single book, in that section. So I was reading all that stuff as my first sort of adult literature, when you went from the kids section to the adult section. Yeah. So I say mix that up then with comics. Yeah. And you're still doing that. And then 2000 AD comes out and it's got 2000 AD, you knew whoever was doing it had a bit of sus.
Yes. Yeah.
So you thought, well, that's the venue. That's going to be the comedy club to strut your stuff, as it were.
Yeah. They had to... Were you academic then? I mean, because you sound like you're a smart kid, or were you interested in things that weren't schoolwork, or were you good?
Yeah.
Were you good at school as well?
Music was a big thing as well, because it's died out now, which is really sad and strange. That's that voice of the English working class music thing, because it renewed itself so often, didn't it?
Yeah.
So I was a kid in the 60s, so I had all the Beatles and all that amazing stuff happening when I was a kid. And then when you come into kind of more full-blown kind of consciousness, and it's glam rock and David Bowie and the early Eno, Roxy musics, and then it leads punk happens, and then it's that all it's always seemed to renew itself every 5 years or so. There'd be something completely new coming up. And as you got into those guys like Bowie, they'd talk about oh, well, I based that on Weimar Berlin, and you think, what's Weimar Berlin? You'd have to then you go and find out what it was, and that'd lead you into artists that were hanging around that time, and you'd find Max Ernst and all the surrealists, and you start reading Andre Breton's surrealist manifestos. Crazy stuff. It all done in my bedroom because that was the kind of cave, the cave, where it all happened.
Well, Bret Easton Ellis has got a really interesting hypothesis on this. Like, his thing is, like, youth culture was kind of come in with rock and roll, like people wanting to be in bands and everything. People wanted to grow up before the 50s, didn't they? They couldn't wait to be like their dad. So when they were 14, they'd slicked back hair and a suit on and everything, But then in the 50s, youth culture, post-war, the boomers and everything, it was kind of, we're going to have a good time and we're going to learn how to play the guitar and all this kind of stuff and form bands. When I was at school, everybody was in a band. Like almost everybody in my class was in a band. And now that's quite rare. When I talk to kids, I'm quite surprised how few want to make it as musicians or whatever. It's rare. X Factor's maybe as big as it gets, somebody queuing up to sing a song or something like that, But Bret Easton Ellis has got a really interesting idea, and he said that the reason there's less young writers, less young breakthrough artists, like the Steven Spielbergs, those 20-something savants, he said, is because kids don't have time to get bored now. Because I was bored all the time. But if you're on social media, you're constantly preoccupied. So you never think, I'm going to spend 6 weeks learning how to play the guitar because your screen.
Yeah, that's made a massive difference, isn't it? The computer, internet and everything. It's really, I guess you can plot the decline of British youth culture with the rise of the internet.
1999 was probably the kind of end almost, wasn't it? Like from like Britpop and everything was kind of the last gasp of it, really, wasn't it? From 55
it was, from mid 50s to sort of 2000 or so, or whenever it fizzled out. I mean, there's been a couple of things since, but nothing major, just the odd band might appear, but you feel like it's become culturally irrelevant now, rock and roll and all that stuff, and rap now holds the culture,
But for a long time, I mean, rap's going back over 30 years now, so I mean, it's not like
but it's the dominant form now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not gone away.
Verse, chorus, verse, guitar solo, fade. it's almost like the sonnet, isn't it? The form of pop music, which has gone now. And rap is a more collage art form.
Yeah.
No, it's sort of, it pulls samples and this and that, and you know, I regret the passing of the youth culture, but I mean, you know, in a way, there's a sort of there's an excitement in witnessing a fundamental shift in the culture that means that all that stuff I grew up with is now gradually going down the memory hole. It's, you know, because when you're young, you think, oh, that'll last forever.
Yes, yeah.
And you think, God, no, it won't actually.
Well, what amazes me is that even stuff that, you know, I would assume everybody knows, like, you know, 1950s, 1960s stuff is gone for people, you know, that when I was a kid, I would watch Harold Lloyd and things like that. I'd watch things that were almost 100 years old, you know, but now I saw some market research on this and people will generally not watch something that's more than 5 years old, which is quite odd, isn't it? You know, like anything beyond that is like, one of my kids said to me, I don't want to watch Jaws. It's all dead guys, you know. But then she watched it and she loved it, you know, but I kind of see it as our job is to curate for the kids, isn't it? To say, listen, there's some really good stuff. Try this out. And then I try and learn from them as well. I mean, I've got into like Blue Exorcist and things like that, manga stuff from my kid, you know, and I'll show her Jaws, you know, that kind of.
Yeah. Blue Exorcist.
Yes. It sounds like a porno, I know, but like, but it's, you know, stuff that I'd be unaware of, you know, like, and that's one nice thing about having kids as well, you know, is they kind of keep you up to date. Like I remember
good title,
every character on Disney and all that kind of stuff, you know, and I was picking it up by osmosis because I'd be reading the book while it's on in the background, you know. It's quite nice.
Yeah, one of the things I find weird as well is like all those hours and hours spent studying, you know, Steranko and Bernie Wrightson, picking up that bit from Steranko, or you know, Bernie Wrightson hands with the veins on the top and stuff. And it's almost like irrelevant now. You know, like, it's no, you know, that whole history and lineage is evaporated now, isn't it?
It's like being able to play the Elizabethan harp or something like that. You know, just it belongs to another time.
A pair of Wrightson hands is no good to you anymore.
But you know what though? There'll always be some niche group who's into these things we're into. You know, like, are you in that Today's Inspiration group on Facebook? Are you on that now?
No,
are you on
don't go on Facebook?
That's right. Chaikin put me onto this, and it's fantastic because I really miss talking about comic art. You know, because I'd always stand around in the comic shop and chat with guys about, and they'd see artists I'd never seen before and all that. And there's actually a webpage that kind of does this. It's called Today's Inspiration Group, and every day
you go to talk about Wrightson hands.
Yeah, it really is, and it's like you're not allowed to show anything post 1975. The guy who runs it's got this thing. He doesn't want anything after 75. You're not allowed to promote your own work. But there's something amazing about discovering stuff that you didn't know. You know, like some inker from 1948 or something, and there's a whole big discussion about them, you know? Yeah. And I guess it'll always exist in some form, but when I was coming into comics, everybody talked about this stuff. Did you find that when you would go to UCAC? That was deep conversations about this kind of
thing? Well, me and Brett did, and then, say, Pete Milligan, when Pete sort of joined the gang, as it were. And, you know, but we weren't really that in touch with other artists. I mean, there were certain guys you'd have a pint with, like Gary Leach or something.
Yeah.
So I didn't really chat with other artists much. We were in our own little group. There was the big, when I went to Westminster Hall, you know, where that was the earliest part, UCAC time. There'd be a table with like Alan Moore, Brian Bolland, Dave Gibbons, Mike McMahon, that crew. They were like the older boys. Yeah. And we were the next crew up, you know. We were on our own separate table. It's quite strange, like school or something, you know.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because sometimes people are a wee bit funny about the guys who are coming up just behind them as well. You know, like it's like some anti-evolutionary thing, isn't it? Where you think, oh, these guys might replace me. Were they? Because you guys seemed like the cool crowd when I was coming into comics. Like, were those guys who were a wee bit older? Were they a bit threatened by you guys, or were they friendly with you and everything? Were they all right?
Dave Gibbons was.
Yeah, Dave's a great guy, isn't he?
Yeah, I remember when we had when Strange Days came out, and I brought a copy up to the Westminster UCAT, whatever that mart was that everybody went to, and we were showing it to a couple of people saying, "Oh, we only got the box of Strange Days that week."
Yeah.
So me, Brett, and maybe it was Peter. Peter probably was there as well, and I remember Dave Gibbons spotting it and coming up, so go have a look at that, you know, sort of taking it away and going through it all, you know, because we'd got our own comic, and it was
Right.
like, these guys, like, how come they've got their own comic in America? Yeah.
It's because that little crew, like, I know you were at school with Brett, weren't you? Like, you
I
guys
wasn't
were,
at school with him. He lived down a couple of streets away.
but school age though, you were pals.
Yeah,
at
similar
school?
age. Yeah,
Yeah. So what age did you meet Brett then? What age were you?
about 14, I'd say.
Right. And were you ever at that point where you thought, right, comics is behind me now? Or because I hit my teens and I get even more into it. Like at the age when you should be calming it down, I got more into it. So were you and Brett a bit like that as well? Just you fell in love with it
but
completely?
because we could then share the enthusiasm, and I could actually, you could actually go through an issue of The Flash and look at Infantino and how he drew asses and slim little figures he'd do. All his figures were very like fashion Audrey Hepburn type characters. He had all that Ivy League vibe to his work.
Yes.
Breakfast at Tiffany's feel. And, we'd look at all that stuff and then, try and absorb it somehow and draw. I mean, Brett was very influenced by Infantino. His early work, his later work became more, muscular and Schwarzenegger-like, but probably to do with the strips he was drawing. But there was always that style. If you look at Johnny Nemo, there's a style in it, like people wear stylish clothes,
It's funny that now you mention it, because I always think of you as a little bit. Your influences really vary. There's obviously Ditko, and I think there's 70s Kirby in there. Like those big double page spreads and everything, and the use of color is very 70s Kirby, isn't it? The way it's the bright colors and everything, and usually the same primary ones as well. Just really in your face. But I think there's an Infantino quality to your stuff as well. Like I think the broadness of the faces, and Brett's got that too, actually, isn't it?
But in our earlier stuff, which was pre 2000 AD, because what we had to do was our natural drawing style was quite fine and finessed. So but it was more like Infantino or say something early Mike Kaluta. The shadow was quite a big influence. That Kaluta shadow that he
that's the early 70s one. Yeah, it's great.
And I was quite into Barry Smith, when he was drawing Conan. So there was all that little mini time just after the Kirby period. Well, that was quite an interesting period of comics there, because you had all the 70s Kirby stuff, OMAC and things. And then you had that Kaluta, Wrightson and Smith hitting all roughly the same time.
Yeah.
So that was good gave us a bit of extra energy, because and Dead Man, Neil Adams, and that one episode of Deathlock that Rich Buckler drew. That there was one really good episode, pretty much the first one, and then all these shitty Incas, and it never quite gelled after that Deathlock. It's a good character, and interesting, isn't it? But things like Deathlock, how they prefigure the cyber thing,
Yeah, just a bit too early.
It was the first of that one, So once we had to get stuff into 2000 AD, you had to sort of somehow ape Brian Bolland or ape Carlos Esquerra, and then you had to change your drawing style. So I had to learn how to draw 2000 AD style a bit,
Right. That's interesting, because sometimes
early stuff is so horrible.
Did you do anything before Sometimes Stories? Because I got a copy of that years ago, and it's from 1977. Was there anything published before that, or was that your first thing?
Yeah, that's the first published one. Yeah.
And I know what you mean. It's the way, when younger, teenagers draw, it's a very fine line, isn't it? Because you try and make something as photorealistic as possible, don't you? And then you find your style with a broader approach as you get a little older,
Yeah, my style was a bit more elegant because of those influences, and then it became a bit more lumpen because 2000 AD was a more lumpen style, big blacks and those corrugated outside lines that Carlos did, so you had to sort of somehow put enough of that stuff in so that the editor would go, oh yeah, that looks enough like them.
But Sometimes Stories come out, Punk 77, so you get Punk, you get the Coronation, the big Union Jack on the cover and everything, and 2000 AD obviously launching at the same time, and Captain Britain as well, the Marvel UK Captain Britain. But were you aware of this, or were you doing it in a vacuum? Were you guys just like, was that going to happen anyway? Had you planned that in 1975, 76 before you did it in 77?
Well,
or were you riding a wave of comics at that point?
No, we always wanted to do our comics, and I always got into comics to do my stuff, not other people's. So when I first broke in America, I mean, I got offered quite a lot of like X-Force and all this stuff, big, not quite the big Marvel ones, but the ones underneath. But I turned them down because I wanted to do my stuff, not their stuff. You know? And well, you're obviously a bit like that as well, aren't you?
I didn't used to be though. All I ever wanted to do was Superman and the Flash and
I
everything.
know you really want to do that stuff, whereas I not really that bothered. I mean, all that stuff meant, you know, I just live in the Kurt Swan Superman world. That's Superman to me. I don't. When they gave him long hair and all that, no,
it looked like Chippendale for a while, didn't it? But I didn't fall in love with Creator Owns until, you know, I did Wanted. I'd never even considered it, because for me, I was always desperate to get in. And I know you're such a fan, you love Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, but you just saw it as your childhood, and it wasn't what you wanted to do as an adult then. It was, you wanted to do your own things.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, because I always used to draw my own comics with my own characters.
Yeah.
And then obviously I was influenced by those things, you know, those Alan Class, Ditko stories.
Yes. Yeah.
Ridiculous, weren't they? They were so badly printed. They looked like old medieval chapbooks, you know, like wood printed things, you know, because they were so shittily printed.
But I think that's why they worked, isn't it? Like
for anyone who doesn't, that's their best. To me, that's the best exposure of and printing of the Ditko pre-superhero stuff.
I hate
when you see it in those collections, it's now horrible with that horrible ink and color and shitty paper. You know, it ruins it. I mean, I even prefer the old Alan Class black and white Ditkos to the. I've subsequently bought old early 60s Marvel collections with Ditko stories in them.
Yeah,
they're in color, and I somehow they're not as good to me as the black and white ones. You know,
I totally agree.
Illustrations or something.
He drew them in black and white. He didn't draw them in color. You know, so it's pure Ditko. The inks look beautiful in black and white, don't they?
I once sent him a couple of like Uncanny Tales, those Alan Class things.
Oh, really? Yeah.
With loads of his stuff in it.
And
he wrote back to me saying, "I recognize this as my work, but I can't recall drawing it." It's so long ago, you know.
I love the idea that he talked like Rorschach. You know, like he just every message people have just as that Rorschach dialogue, isn't it?
So telegraph style of writing in pencil. Have you ever had a letter from him? I don't know if you.
No, I worked with him. I did a 4-page dark side story once. Yeah.
Did you interact with him at all?
I didn't know. It was kind of being able to do that. It was like the mid 90s to late 90s. I was just kind of coming in, and I was actually just in awe at kind of getting to work with Ditko. And what's kind of weird is that he wasn't regarded by publishers at that point as an honor to work with, and I couldn't believe it. I felt as if I was working with God. You know, it was such a huge thing. But you know, artists hit that point. Even Alex Toth, Chaikin was telling me this, that Alex Toth in his final years was looking for work. You know, and the guys and Gil Kane was the same. You know, the guys we really look up to, strangely don't have the kudos. I think
in Ditko's case, his work did drop off a lot. I think.
Yes, by the 70s.
You know, like Rom Space Knight is. Yeah. You know, I don't want to look at that. I just want to look at the great stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But it's amazing all that, you know, buying all those Marvel comics off the spinners and the newsagents and going around all the newsagents in the local area, just in case they'd get a batch that the other ones hadn't, you know, and and getting this issue number that the others hadn't got, you know.
Was that the case in England?
Hey?
I thought that was just a Scottish thing. Is that down your way as well in England?
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes you'd wait 2 years between stories and things, wouldn't you? You know, like it was such an infrequent shipping.
Well, it was infrequent in that you might miss a month, but you could get the bulk of the stuff. They would generally get in, but sometimes the shipment wouldn't come in, and you'd think, "What? Where's this month's Fantastic Four or something?" You know.
Well, I found there was a Superman comic when I was 6. That was a 4-parter, and I didn't get the final part until I was 13. I waited for all those years.
Yeah, we had a really good secondhand bookshop up the road from us called Lambs. Yeah. And these two really old people that the shop been there, like must have been 50 years or something, all through the Blitz and everything, you know. And they just had it was on this old smelly bookshops with piles and piles of things, you know, stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
She knew where everything was, this woman, Mrs. Lamb. And I'd go in there, and she knew, because I'd always be in there rummaging around for the comics.
Mm-hmm.
She goes, "Oh, I've got a new pile of Marvels in. Hang on a minute." And she'd climb up the step ladder and pull them out from somewhere. And they're all tied up with string. And she'd undo the string and put them down. And there you go, son, have a look through them. And then you just go through everything and think, "Oh, great, there's that Fantastic Four." And then she'd have she only knew that there was Marvels and DCs.
Right, yeah.
and everything else went into a third pile. You know, the Harvey and all that stuff. But
was that your first exposure to American comics then? I mean, what was the earliest thing you can remember looking at and having to ask what it was called? You know, you'd never seen this before in terms of Marvel, DC.
Well, my older brother Jim was buying them, so I'd read them from him, and then I'd started to get them myself. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was that. You know, you do outgrow British comics. You know, like, and the last one you let go of was Valiant, because it had My Tech the Mighty, and did it have Steel Claw? I think
I think so. Yeah, that was
And Kelly's Eye.
Kelly's Eye. Yeah.
Yeah, it actually had somehow it had all the good characters in it.
Yes.
Robot Archie might have been in it, I think.
Yeah.
And so Valiant was the one. That was the pre-2000 AD one, and then you sort of went through it, and then I got into American comics more, and then 2000 AD got you back in, you know, to British comics again.
Yes. Yeah.
That was that order. But it was weird, isn't it? To that early. You're 10 years younger than me, so was 2000 AD must have been going before you were aware of it? Or?
No, not for me personally. I wasn't into it, strangely. You know, I didn't get into it till later. I didn't appreciate it. Like, I saw things that were British as not that good, and things that were American as amazing. You know, and because Scotland's so in love with America, it's a bit like Ireland. You know, so Superman always seemed more interesting to me than Valiant or whatever. So as soon as I found American comics like Doctor Who and Star Wars, you know, I left the British thing behind and went straight to the American thing.
Yeah.
But everybody in my class read it. I mean, 2000 AD was massive when I was at school.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it, how it was like what Monty Python was if you were a school kid when I was growing up. Like, everybody knew about it and read it and could quote it. And that was what 2000 AD was for a good decade, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Did it sell like 400 to 500,000 copies a week or something?
I think the figures I saw, which were probably slightly past its peak, was 150,000 a week. Oh, right. But I think that had come down from a higher number, but I don't know what that number was. But British comics, it's crazy to think now, but American reprints of Spider-Man, Planet of the Apes, Dracula Lives and everything, mid-70s were doing 150,000 a week, each one of those books, in Britain alone, you know? Which is crazy, isn't it? When you think of those numbers now. I mean, every boy in my class was reading those books, which is so. I kind of got into comics in 1977 when I was about 7, and I think it was that time 2000 AD starting and everything. So it was a bit like Pokemon. Everybody in the class was into it, but because you're 10 years older, did you find at school almost nobody was into it then? Like, it was something you had to kind of hide a little bit, being into this stuff once you hit a certain age?
Well, 2000 AD was the one that, but you're older then. It was about mid-70s of 2000 AD?
77.
So by then you're a kind of 17, 18. That's right. It was cool to read it. So and it was part of the currency, you know. Sex Pistol Records, 2000 AD.
Yes.
You know, it was just it was on a par with everything. So it's, remember there'd be questions in the house. I think they were responsible for someone.
And it's funny because comics had that Dave reputation, didn't they?
Did you do Big Dave, which there were questions in the house?
There was. It's like, because we saw that as very much in the tradition of British comics, which were quite anarchic, isn't it? And it's funny because, you know, Britain's most famous comic book character is Dennis the Menace, which is a young anarchist, essentially, isn't it? Whereas America's most famous is Batman, is a guy who helps the police. You know, it's really interesting, the difference in the cultures, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't know Dennis the Menace was still that big.
It's certainly the most well-known in the UK, you know, like, because I mean, my kids and my granddad would know Dennis the Menace. It's strange to think it's just multi-generational.
That one's lasted, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it's one of those, it's like that God of Mischief thing, isn't it? Like, kids absolutely love it. Like, when I read it to the kids at night time, that it's just the glee, you know, somebody who's making a teacher's life difficult. I mean, that's timeless, isn't it?
Yeah. He was a good artist, the guy who drew the original Dennis the Menace. I know there's new ones now, but he used to love his knees, you know, those 2 lines.
Leo Baxendale's Bash Street Kids and all that kind of stuff was amazing as well. I loved all that. Were you into Dudley D. Watkins? Were you aware of Dudley D?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
I didn't know if he was a thing in England, but everybody in Scotland knows him, you know?
Yeah, he wasn't like, because of Ooh Willie and all that stuff. He wasn't known individually, but he was definitely one of the stars. Baxendale and Watkins were the stars of those comics, you know. and then when you're a bit older, it's Jesus Blasco, whatever his name is,
Yeah.
the guy with the steel claw. And
Yes. Yeah.
is it Eric Bradbury who did My Tech? I think
Yeah, I think it was. You know, he was still around when I was working in the 90s, you know, like he was still, I mean, he was a good age, he was in his 70s or something, but still plugging away, you know. I kind of love that, you know, when you find out that somebody who you assume is just the same age as you or whatever, then you find out this guy was in World War II or something like that. Like John M. Burns is like 85 and still drawing and still brilliant. Yeah.
When I used to get that old secondhand bookshop, it'd be full of things like piles and piles of things like Radio Fun. You know, all that stuff featuring Petula Clark.
Do you know, I saw Petula Clark about 2 months ago.
Did you?
And she's 90 now.
Yeah.
I went to see Mary Poppins in the West End.
Oh, right.
And she came out after it and she was just going home. And she came out the stage door and I didn't know she was the old lady singing the bird song, you know, like, so she's still about and still good. You know?
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah. What a long career.
But I kind of love that, you know, like I'm never excited to see Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie or something, but if I saw Lisa Goddard or Priscilla Clark, I'm like, oh my God, you know. Yeah. But so art school, then I can never quite figure out when you went to art school because you seem to be doing 2000 AD. Was it at the same time or did you
No, I finished art school. Then I got we did sometimes stories while I was at art school.
Right.
And then when I left art school, I remember being with a bunch of mates and they said, come on, we're going down the Dole office to sign on. Yeah. Right. And I said, oh, right, okay. And they said, yeah, you get 17 quid a week. And I thought, 17 quid a week? I can earn that. Surely I can earn 17 quid a week. And I thought, and also there was a sort of scene around the Dole, but just people hanging around and wasted and stuff. And I thought, I've got to be able to draw. I wanted to be, you know, to get comics going. Yeah. So I used to read music papers like the NME and Sounds and all that stuff. And there used to be a strip in Sounds that had stopped. Yeah. I thought maybe they want a new strip. Oh, nice. And because punk had just happened, the thing that discontinued had been a kind of hippie type, fat Freddy's cat kind of, you know, that sort of. I thought I've got to hit them with a punk strip and, you know, they'll take it, you know. So I don't know how I got the confidence, but I just did up 3 episodes of The Electric Hoax, which I just did all myself, photocopied them, sent them in saying, don't you think it's about time you had a new strip and you should do it punk and punk's what's that, you know, some old nonsense. And the guy just phoned me up because I put my phone number on it and said, hey, we really like this stuff. When, you know, can we start it? We'll start with the one you sent us. Yeah. I said, oh, I didn't realize they would print that one, you know. That's amazing. So and then I had to, so I was about 3 weeks ahead. So I had to really get serious about drawing then. And they were I was getting 25 quid per strip from them, which is more than Dole money. Yeah. And that was it. I was on my way then. I thought, well, if I can earn more than the Dole, I'll just do that. And plus I'm actually in print, you know. And that was that before Alan Moore? Because I think Electric Hoax. Alan took over when I quit Electric Hoax. Yeah. He then got into this. He jumped in there and got his stuff in. You know. Right. It's funny to think of Alan also being a guy just looking for an opening, isn't it? You know, everybody was that guy at one time. Yeah, and it's fun. Yeah, because like he must be in the same, you know, as any of us. He's scanning around, looking what's going on, what's happening. You know, so he's aware of all that stuff, and he's thinking, "Hang on, and that guy's just finished. I'm going to get in the, you know." Yeah. And I was always, there was another artist working there who had a strip, but he never quit. He was always in it. But he was really good, called Savage Pencil. Do you know? Oh, I remember Savage Pencil. Is that what he started, NME then? Yeah. He was in Sounds. It was Sounds. Right. Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Sounds was the kind of slightly naff version of NME. NME was the prestigious one. You know? Those guys were good allies of comics, though, weren't they? Because whenever I used to pick up NME, there was sometimes a wee interview with Alan Moore or a Watchmen feature or something like that. You could tell we were all into the same stuff, weren't we? Well, it was, I think, people like me and Alan Moore and, you know, to a lesser degree, Brian Bolland and Dave Gibbons, because it's less in their work. Yeah. But they were coming out of the, you know, the counterculture. Yeah. Was very pervasive. And there was that thing of picking up, for some reason, there was a newsagent which used to get a load of slightly more international stuff in where I lived in London. I don't know why they particularly got stuff, but they seem to get different stuff to the other newsagents. They'd get American underground comics now and then. And that's where I'd get people like Robert Crumb.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then there was a British reprint of Robert Crumb and Fabulous Fairy Freak Brothers. I think it was called Nasty Tales. So, you know, so that was another branch. So you were exposed to all the counterculture stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was, and then going into sounds and then rock and roll music angle, that's all more counterculture and druggy.
Yeah.
And so obviously Alan Moore was in there. Brian Talbot was another guy who did, I mean, he was around same time as us, like real early, what did he, Chester B. Hackenbush. He did some like basically ode to dope smoking.
Yeah.
Basically it was like an underground comic, like Fat Freddy. And there was another guy called John Bolton who was a sort of more of a square artist. He did Shadow Facts or whatever some guy was, some like Shadow.
I can't imagine him in a music magazine. Was John Bolton doing music?
No, I'm not. You know, John Bolton wasn't in that. He was somehow. I would see him in fanzines, and also I think he did. He might have done stuff for UK Marvel.
Yeah, I think he did. I remember
he did stuff for Des Skin in his stuff.
You remember they used to do annuals in the 70s where they would collect some Marvel comics or DC comics, 3 stories in a hardback annual. John Bolton used to quite often draw the illustrations inside the annuals that was kind of at the contents pages, and they were spectacular. Like they were so good. They were. It was kind of like Alex Ross photorealism, you know.
I certainly noticed him, you know, as a kid. I think, who's that guy? He's a British guy, but he's got an American style or something.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And he seemed to be influenced by the Shadow, and seemed to, you know, he was really good with shadow work. You know, quite a big influence on David. You know, the guy who did V for Vendetta. Is it David
Lloyd?
Yeah. Dave feels like he had quite a big influence on him. Just looking at David.
There's a definite Kaluta vibe to Bolton, though, isn't there? I mean, I'll send you some stuff that you'll absolutely love. There's this great shot he did in 1977 of Batman leaning back against a bar, right? And it's the coolest shot of Batman you've ever seen in your life, but it looks like a Kaluta drawing. It's absolutely brilliant. It's great. Yeah,
there was that British Marvel thing, that sort of, you know, the Captain Britain stuff, but I didn't follow that. It felt, to me, it felt a bit, you know, too square or something. I don't know. So I didn't, I mean, I was aware of the artists. Is it Paul Neary? I think he's quite a veteran. Yeah. And a couple of other guys. But I was in a slightly different, I was more sort of proto-Vertigo before that coalesced or something, you know.
So, I mean, you'd have been into, you know, that 70s Marvel that for me was a little bit frightening because I was younger, you know, so Doctor Strange by Englehart and everything was terrifying to me as a kid, you know, Planet of the Apes even was scary, you know. So I kind of liked the solidity of Superman and the Flash and everything, you know. So I was at that age where British Marvel was good, you know.
When you had your comics, I used to put them into the order of reading. Right. I'd start with Spider-Man first, then Fantastic Four, then it'd probably go over to you know, I remember a time when, believe it or not, adventure comics were good. You know, the Legion of Superheroes as drawn by Kurt.
It's amazing. Yeah.
There was a run for about a year or so, and it was really good. It was
the Jim Shooter, Was it the Jim Shooter?
It was the Death of Pharaoh Boy and Gulag 13 and Luck Lords and all this stuff. And it was for some reason it hit a groove, and it was drawn by Kurt Swan, which is my favorite. By George Klein, and it was fantastic.
Have you ever seen Kurt Swan's pencils, like when he's not inked?
Yeah, I've seen them in some fanzines. Yeah,
they're spectacular, you know. And I remember seeing him as an old man. I worked with him on one of the last things that he did, right? Wow. And the pencils came through, and I thought, my God, this guy's just not had the best inkers for the last 20 years. He's still got it, but the inkers that were doing the stuff were just a little clunkier than the Murphy Andersons and the George Kleins and everything, you know. Yeah. And it was such a shame because the actual pencils were still beautiful, even in his 70s. They were as good as ever.
Yeah, he was a guy that he was so ubiquitous that you didn't kind of, you know, like you don't notice the design of a Coca-Cola bottle or a cereal box.
Yeah.
It felt like he was in that realm. Yeah. It was so sort of almost perfect or something of that vintage. And I think, you know, many people said it's Superman when he's your dad, you know, that era of Superman.
Yes.
And but now I've come to really appreciate him and think I put him up there with Kirby and Ditko.
And he doesn't get the He doesn't get that from people at all, doesn't he? Like, people never talk about Swan in the same way. But I mean, he was banging out 2 books a month. He was doing Superman and Action every month as well.
Yeah, all his and it's very. I can't think of a non-perfect panel.
Always
everything, all the covers were great, all the
Yeah.
drawings, interiors. I mean, most comics he didn't draw inside. Did you get Wayne Boring? Who I didn't like his Posey did a Superman coming to land.
I hated Wayne Boring as a kid, right? But see, in lockdown, I really started. Weirdly, the thing that got my middle daughter into comics was adventure comics, the 60s adventure comics. She was burning through them. And then we did the Wayne Boring Supermans, and I remember always hating them as a kid because it was
I did.
It was too cartoony for me, I think, after Kurt Swan, which had a Norman Rockwell kind of vibe, didn't it? Yeah. But I actually really appreciated him. It's a bit like Frank Robbins, when you're a kid you hate Frank Robbins, and then when you're older you're like, this guy's amazing. He's actually brilliant.
Yeah, I remember being disgusted when he took over. Didn't he take over from Steranko on S.H.I.E.L.D. for a couple of issues, and then he took over the Shadow after Kaluta?
Oh yes, I remember the Shadow.
No, that was it.
And Johnny Hazard. In my office, I've got an original piece of his up above my fire. It's a big Johnny Hazard spread. It's fantastic. It's so good.
Yeah, I didn't really get or understand or appreciate the brushy sort of stuff.
Same here. Yeah.
I do now. I like that stuff a lot more.
John McCrae said an interesting thing to me, and he said, as a kid, you want everything to look real, and then as an adult, you realize that's quite boring, and you want it to look interesting. And there's something in that, isn't there? You get into the guys you hated as a kid.
That's right, but it's interesting to when you get that appreciation of people like Kurt Swan about because they're so like they're almost like advertising art. They're so perfect that you can't find a way into them. Now, I mean, because I could never do it, and you look at the influence of Kurt Swan on all those guys like Daniel Clowes, for example.
Yeah.
You can see Kurt Swan in all that stuff. That perfection. The Love and Rockets, Jaime Hernandez.
Yes,
same kind of thing again. He's an amazing artist, Jaime Hernandez, isn't he? That
amazing.
A couple of there's some early Love and Rockets where he hasn't quite perfected it, and then about number 4 or 5, he clicks as Hermione, and his stuff is exactly the same for the last 20 years. Just perfect, always good. Every panel's great. You think,
do you think people want to see an artist grow and change, or do you think people want the same thing from somebody?
Well, there's different types of artists, isn't there? I'm not like him. I'd get bored, and I have to change them. That's why. Do you remember that? I don't know if you were reading them then, but when it was coming out in 2000 AD, that kind of dance between Brian Bolland and Mick McMahon.
Yes, I read them later, but it's quite jarring, isn't it?
Yeah, but you felt like McMahon was innovating all the time, changing his style, making the boots bigger, the chin big. He was more cartoony in some ways, and you didn't know what his influences were because he obviously wasn't really looking at American comics. He was looking at other stuff, and I didn't know it was. I wasn't really familiar with Alex Toth at that time. And then Bolland, you knew because of the American comic influence. But McMahon was. Brian Bolland was often taking from McMahon and adding to his stuff. So that was an amazing little bit of battle between the two guys for about 2 or 3 years, when they were coming right up.
But it's interesting. Somebody was talking about this in an early podcast. I think it might have been Rob Liefeld, and it was that idea that you don't just get one good guy appearing. It's a bit like music, isn't it? There's a wave of people come in, and then they all compete with each other. And on their own, these guys might not have been as brilliant as they were, but when Kev O'Neill is competing with Mike McMahon, who's competing with Brian Bolland, it's Darwinian, isn't it? You end up with something absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, well, that's you get that in comedy, don't you? Waves of comedians come up, and then there's a lull, and then there's a new lull, and same as comics. There was that first wave that you mentioned. Then we myself, Brett Ewins, and I suppose Grant came in a bit after it, but part of that second wave, and then you came in. There was, it was an interesting, it was a good venue, 2008, wasn't it? Because you got noticed, you got the Americans were watching it like a hawk. Who's the hot new guy?
It's funny. I always think of 2000 AD as our Oxbridge or our Footlights.
Yeah, exactly.
It's where we started, and then everybody goes off and does their Fish Called Wanda or whatever. They all go off and do their thing.
Well, it's amazing where everybody went, isn't it? Like, look at you, look at what I did, look at what Grant's done, look at Alan Moore. Look, amazing level of achievement, isn't it? That came out of that period.
All working class guys, which is interesting too. Very rare. I mean, what I find now, as my life has changed, is the number of people I meet who go to boarding school, who went to boarding school, is huge. Like everybody I meet in the film industry, went to boarding school, but in Britain, but everybody grew up kind of in housing schemes, didn't we? Which is really odd, and yet we've all done well in our own ways. 2000 AD was the catalyst for that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was talking to some director about a year ago or so, and he was, had read 2000 AD as a kid, so he was more like, he wasn't that interested. He liked great Mad Max, fantastic, but you did that strip later, didn't you? And you did, he was more. That was what he was impressed by.
Well, it's funny. I remember, I don't know if it was Sean or Duncan or somebody, we were talking about you years ago, and we were saying, I wish Brendan would do more comics, because you were obviously doing your Hollywood stuff and everything. Yeah. And when you showed up in comics, it was kind of an event, like it was a big deal when you would come in and do something like even an 8-page dread and an annual or something. Everybody would make sure they had it, and and I think maybe Duncan that said it. He said, I think Brendan loves comics so much, he doesn't want to burn himself out on it. I think he wants to just come in, be brilliant, and disappear and go and do something. Definitely. Is that the way you see it? Yeah,
it is. It's also I have to work so hard at drawing, because I'm not. I look at people that are naturally have a natural flow of talent. Like Simon Bisley, he can draw with a, half drunk, eating fish and chips, knocking out some slain or something.
Yeah,
he's just got that amazing amount of talent. Whereas for me, I have to. Comics are a hard slog for me. They're like digging a hole in the road. Artistic navying. And when you go into other industries, like you start designing films and animation, it's a piece of piss. And you think, what? You should try drawing comics, buddy.
Well, it's funny, because friends of mine who are painters, who will say, I think I'll give comics a bash. They're like, hang on, so I basically have to do 5 paintings a page. And they realise quickly it's a tough slog, isn't it? It's hard.
I mean, for people that are really, good at it, like some of those Italian guys you've been using in your recent stuff. I mean, they're just fantastic to look at that flow and fluidity, because they've got it. But for me, it's just redrawing it and drawing all the time to get the arm right, and you can't get it right, and then you have to put it away, and you look at it next day, and you've drawn the head too far to the left on the shot. You've got to raise the head and move. You go, ah. So it's all that torture before you get to ink it. So I can't say I enjoy drawing comics. I enjoy having drawn them, but not the drawing of them.
It's like a baby, I guess, isn't it? Having a baby. You like the end. But your stuff doesn't look like that to me as well. I mean, I guess it's like acting or whatever. You make it look easy. You make it look as if you're having a good time.
Yeah.
So somebody like Travis Charest, right, has got this hyper detailed thing that you can see him agonizing on it, right? So you can see the pain as he's doing it, because he's thinking it through so much. But your stuff is so free that it feels like you're having a good time. So are you second guessing yourself then?
No. Once all the underdrawing is there and it's right, I will then ink exactly to make it look looser. I'll ink it slightly with a bit of flourish, because to me that's where the performance bit comes in.
Yeah,
because I'm going to do the performance in the inking, because I've done all the graft underneath it. And once you erase all the pencils, then it looks light, and you just think, oh, that was a good witty line you drew around that. But that was about 3 hours of penciling to get that arm right. So I don't take it lightly drawing comics. It's like I felt that the last thing I did published was Knacker of the Stars for 2000 AD. Yeah, and I'd had the idea for about 30 years. I thought, I've got to do this, otherwise I'm going to stop drawing comics soon, because my eyes were just getting too bleary. And I thought, I'm just going to get this bugger done, and I'm going to get him out and make 2000 he can have it. You don't own the property when you give it to him. But that was the biggest slog, drawing that strip. That nearly done my head in, drawing it. It's so hard to draw.
And see, the years that when you went out of comics and went into film, I didn't know anybody else who'd done that. So I remember whenever we'd all get together, if you were down at a comic mart or something, the comic guys would only get together once or twice a year, usually the UK Comic Art Convention in London. And it was always a bit of a buzz. People would say, did you hear Brendan's in Hollywood and all that, And it was really exciting, because it's a bit like one of those things where you know, working in American comics seemed like a massive jump, didn't it,
Yeah.
from working in British comics?
Yeah.
And then Hollywood was just unfathomable, you know. And
Yeah.
I've never asked you this, but what happened? What was the jump from 2000 AD to doing this? Was the Storyteller with Jim Henson your first thing? Was that the first gig that you got?
It wasn't my first, but it was the gig that set me on the course to
Right.
Hollywood. I'd done.
Was that UK based?
Yeah, it was
I
in
didn't know that, right.
Hampstead.
Right.
The Creature Workshop where they built all the creatures was
Right.
in Hampstead. That's where the studio was.
Uh-huh.
And the director, Steve Barron, was the hot pop video director. So
Right.
they got him to direct and style the whole series, you know, and you know, he's the one that did all the silhouettes and set up the whole way they were going to tell the story. It's very innovative, and it won Emmys, and it was, you know, I actually watched one or a bit of one a couple of weeks ago. It's quite dated now, but
they're still good.
At the time it was good, and it had Anthony Minghella writing them all, so it had top writing, top directors, top talent. It was, you know, they were just going for quality, you know.
Yeah.
And so Tony Riot, I think, got a gig doing one of the episodes, and he was getting behind, so he phoned me up and said, could you give us a hand inking some boards?
Right.
I said, yeah, right, you know, it's the same as drawing comics. And so and in the end he dropped out to do a movie, and then I then picked up the slack and finished the next, and then did the next episode that he was meant to do. I did it myself, and the director, Steve Barron, really liked my stuff. And he said, I've got this pop video, would you be interested in styling it for me? Because I need some drawings and everything. I've got pictures for was it Michael Jackson? Something like that. Right. And the thing is, he needed the drawings tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
Right. And
this was about 5 o'clock at night. And I said, yeah, no sweat. And I just went, did an all-nighter, delivered the stuff. And he went, this is amazing. Wow. And, you know, got the gig with Michael Jackson, you know.
That's amazing.
And after that, he just used me all the time. Because that was that. I was
Michael Jackson used you all the time. What do you mean?
No, not Michael Jackson. But that was interesting. That was for a song called Bad. And what we were doing all this Michael Jackson. It was going to be stop frame dance routines with, you know, like a smashed up motorbike that reassembles itself into a human type shape with, you know, like exhaust pipes as legs, and it's dancing with Michael. And then there's a, you know, I'd put Day of the Dead type sequence in, but Busby Berkeley Day of the Dead. So everybody's got top hats, but they're all, you know, skeleton type Mexican stuff. You know, nobody had used Day of the Dead at that stage. So it was really, you know, new stuff. And the plot was that these kids are being kidnapped by some fascist police force. And Michael's got releases these young kids from jail and springs them out. That was the loose story for Bad. You know I'm bad. You know that one.
So when did you move stateside then? When did you actually
go? What happened was I did a load of pop videos. I at the same time, I'd reached the point with comics. This is the sort of early 90s. I'd done Rogan Gosh, finished that off. And I was doing covers for Shade, but I was starting to get a bit like, I don't want to, you know, I was sitting basically drawing on a table and looking out my window and seeing the world go by and thinking, I want to be in the world rather than sitting here drawing it, you know. So I was looking for some excitement and adventure, you know. And that was a way into it. And suddenly what I thought the comic book industry would become, with loads of chicks and it was going to be glamorous and everything, and it wasn't. Just as many blokes in Star Trek t-shirts. Suddenly the pop video industry was that, you know, and it was, you know, hot babe secretaries and, you know, like, you know, the director has to go to Cannes for some meeting with Duran Duran. Can you come with me? Because and sketch these while I'm chatting with Duran Duran about the video. So I fly to Cannes and I'm sitting on top of a yacht with all these topless girls sort of hanging about, you know, and there's, you know, whatever the pop group is, that sort of stuff started happening. And I thought, well, this is kind of fulfilling a bit of a need for adventure and something that's happening rather than sitting in a room drawing.
And yet you were always drawn back to comics, which that's what always intrigued me about you.
Get out of them.
You know what I think was going on though? Tell me if I'm right, is that whenever you do something like a pop video or you do storyboards or whatever, you know, you are a design.
Yeah.
The gap between you and the audience is further away than a page. because that's entirely you, isn't it? The page is 100% you with no interference. The autonomy, I bet you missed the autonomy, and that's what kept drawing you back to comics.
Exactly. That's the core of it, is that in the end, comics is the medium in which I made my statement as an artist. So that was it. But I did want to get out of it, though. Also, Image Comics had just kicked off, and we were doing things like Rogan Gosh and Skin and all that stuff. And then Image hits, and they're selling 5 million copies, and you're just thinking, okay, it's a completely new game now. The 80s Brit invasion period is over. That whole Vertigo Brit invasion period, it'll go on, but really, culturally, it's done. And now it's Image Comics. Just like when that faded and you came in with Marvel with Brian, the artist Brian Hitch. And then you had all the attention was with you for about
you have about 10 years. You get about 10 years in the mainstream. Like that,
So that was, what were you? That was mid-90s to mid-2000s, was it?
No, for me it would be late 2000 to probably about 2009 or something. That was the year of mainstream stuff, So that would run through Ultimates up to the end of Civil War and Old Man Logan and things like that, So that was my Marvel period, and then.
Well, that's where all the energy was in that time. Marvel had it all. DC had it in the 80s Brit invasion. Under Jeanette Kahn and Karen Berger. Vertigo, Dark Knight, Watchmen. Then it was Image Comics. And then it was Marvel, and with you and Brian Hitch were the main of that, weren't you?
And Bendis and those guys,
I didn't get his stuff. I think your stuff was the more energized, and
I always say that.
But as an artist, I wasn't reading all of them, but I was aware of it. And and also it laid the architecture for the bloody Marvel cinematic universe.
Well, it's funny. I mean, we didn't know this stuff was ever going to become.
No, I know you didn't.
So Brian and I were like, we were just happy getting a page rate. We were like, this is awesome, and we were making really good royalties and everything too. So we were like, this is brilliant. And then it was weird because everybody forgets now, but Marvel was filing for bankruptcy just before we came in. So the idea, we were worried our checks were going to bounce and everything. We didn't even think there'd be comics, never mind movies, a few years down the line. So it was crazy. But you and Pete, I mean, I always think it's interesting. Like, there was every writer wanted to work with you, every artist wanted to be who I knew in that scene, and everybody would always come up with like sometimes stories. And let's say I'll get McCarthy's first work and all that. They picked it up for £7 or something at the comic mart, and like all the artists were sort of copying your style slightly, and all the writers were like, oh, I'd love to do something with Brendan. But you were very loyal to Pete. Like, what was it about Pete? Because Pete strikes me as quite a different guy from you as well. He didn't grow up as a comic fan and all that kind of stuff. Like, what pulled you guys together?
Well, we met through Brett, because Brett and Pete were at the same art college together. I was a different one. I was at Chelsea. They were at Goldsmiths. And but Pete was very similar in the sense of, we'd go down the pub and drink and argue about, the Vedanta or something, some philosophy or whatever, and just, but having a laugh. And we got more into comics and Ditko, and he started to understand things. And but what I like working with him was, he just got it. He got it. There was a similar sense of humor, similar, he's Irish, migrant background, growing up in London. So there was a lot of similarity just in shared experience. And so, and what was refreshing about Pete, he was widely read. So when you got just comic book guys that only read comics and then they write comics, it's always a regurgitation of shuffling the same cards always, Whereas when you get Pete would be reading James Joyce for leisure, I mean, he generally was into all that stuff rather than posing about it. And so he had a wider range of what characters could do or where you could take things and stuff. So he was quite experimental in his writing. And particularly in that Freakwave strip, when we decided, let's just do something like the Beatles Revolution #9, make something that's comprehensible, but somehow we'll probably find out what it's about in 10 years' time, that sort of thing. So, but when you're in a group, it gives you the, the support to do something like that, rather than if you're on your own, you think, maybe I better not push it that much. Whereas when you got people egging each other on.
That's interesting because I always saw you guys a bit like Lennon and McCartney. It was like two Irish descendant
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah,
artists,
exactly.
really, and even the names sounded almost like Milligan and McCarthy, and there was a great synthesis for your stuff. I can't imagine somebody else writing your stuff in a weird way,
No, it was a lovely collaboration, and it was just one of those things that came together, very compatible, and also I felt we sort of said it, we'd over that 10-year period, pretty much, or 8 years, however long we worked for. We said what we had to say, and then, as I said, once Image was coming out and Pete was doing Shade the Changer Man, then Batman, then he was moving into it more, whereas I was kind of moving out of it, really, and wanting to do other stuff. And so I mean, in a way, I see the stuff I did with Pete as my main comics work, and I've done stuff subsequent to that, which is has been good, but that's the main, like the good run of singles as well.
Yeah. It's great when somebody finds their guy, though, isn't it? Like when, because most people go through their careers and they don't find that, like Scorsese and De Niro or something, where they just bring out the best in each other, And there's nobody like Pete. I mean, I really love Pete's stuff, but I remember reading an interview he did with Anthony Burgess and all that. It's like just he's not the typical British comic pro,
Yeah, he was obsessed with Anthony Burgess. Yeah. Amazing, isn't it? Anthony Burgess was such a big writer, and now you never hear about him.
Yes.
Terrible how don't you find that thing? Well, you're not as old as me. I'm 10 years, so I'm in my mid-60s now.
Yeah.
And I'm old enough now to know that I've lived through, how times change.
Yeah.
If I think of like you think of the 80s, right, and MTV pop videos and Duran Duran videos, or all that stuff going on. There's a certain time, isn't it? There's an atmosphere and feel to the time.
Yes.
Like I think Reagan was in power, and there's a more Americana vibe in America.
Yeah.
And then you compare it to now, where it's all sort of woke and you're a Nazi, and like you think, wow, what completely different times they are, And the woke thing that'll disappear, and there'll be another one where you'll think, oh, do you remember when everything was like that?
Do you not think, though, that, I mean, these things tend to start in America, I guess, is that America just goes through a Puritanism once every generation, doesn't it? There's a weird Puritanism hits that's like, I don't think you watch Game of Thrones, but there's a character called the High Sparrow in it, that nothing was ever pure enough. And people were being tortured for not being pure enough. And then eventually he wasn't pure enough and they're going to take him out, And
it's like that Pat Mills character.
Yes, exactly, yeah. But I think America had it with the Hays Code 100 years ago in cinema. You had it in the 1950s, then you had it in the 80s. People forget this, but the 80s was actually very, very, what we would call woke.
Tipper Gore and the...
They're politically correct, like people were worried about music, making kids go crazy and everything, and I think roughly every 30 years America has this. And what's really odd is they sentimentalized the last time they were in that era. So in the 80s, they were going on about the 50s all the time. The 50s, they're going on about the 30s and so on, So I just think it's part of a cycle. And you have to remember that after the 80s, you had the 90s, which was all Loaded Magazine and all this kind of stuff, So I think we're already coming out of this High Sparrow era.
It was a good decade, wasn't it? It was sort of... I enjoyed the 90s. They seemed quite...
the 90s were fun.
Yeah.
But I think, the insidious side of that, though, is, I was going to talk to you about that as well. Like the comics industry does feel quite different these past maybe 5 or 6 years, but I'd say certainly 10 years, where we talk about it a lot, where people were hunting in packs, trying to take people down, and it was cruelty disguised as virtue, which was the weirdest thing about it, wasn't it? So fair enough if somebody's done something terrible or illegal or whatever, but people were looking up old jokes people had made or tweets and things, and trying to have people destroyed, or if somebody voted for somebody who was slightly right of centre as opposed to left of centre, or vice versa, they were trying to take them down and everything. And it was, for me, I get into comics. I remember walking into the first convention I ever went to and thinking, here's like 500 people who are just like me. This is amazing. I remember just really keen to be friends with everyone, because I didn't know people like this in my real life. I thought, this is great. Here's guys who are into what I'm into. And it was quite a cruel period, wasn't it? I'm glad we're coming out of it, because I think it's gone now. I think now I'm finding when I talk to editors, they're keeping a blacklist of people who tried to destroy other people. So it's no longer the people who were making the bad taste jokes. We see James Gunn's now the head of DC. It's like all the guys who were cancelled are back stronger than ever. But the people doing the witch hunts, I don't think history is going to be kind to these people. But
they've had their moment in the sun.
Yeah.
And that's it. The sales have plummeted, and manga's eating their lunch. You know?
I do wonder what's going to happen, because you and I, it's funny because we talk about, we're in touch most days, you know, and we talk about comics all the time, even though our lives have gone in all these different directions, but we'll never not love it, you know, and we always kind of care what's happening and everything, you know, and we always have our theories. But it is interesting. Nobody actually says it out loud, but I looked at the data recently, and manga in graphic novel terms now used to be in the American market. Manga used to be a niche market, and manga this year was 81% of graphic novels sold in America. And I mean, like, Japanese comics imports were 81% of the American market, and Marvel and DC combined in graphic novels, and they used to dominate the market, were only 6%.
So the other gap is Scholastic, or something like that.
Yeah, and Dogman's enormous. I mean, my kids are obsessed with Dogman. They read it and reread it, you know. But the last, I think the latest Dogman book, the first printing was 5 million copies, you know. So these, you know, when you think X-Men and things like that's doing 50,000 copies or something now, you know, I mean, it's absolutely crazy. But do you think this is like, I mean, it was a weird period, you know. You had creators online trashing other creators, you had people taking people down and all that, and American comics seemed a bit less fun. Or do you think it's a natural evolution, that this is just the next interesting thing, you know, that the Kurt Swan influenced the era, the John Byrne X-Men, all that stuff just belongs to another time, and this is what we want?
I think it's a mixture of factors. I think there's the demographic of comic collectors is aging. I think that a new generation who is buying stuff is going more for manga because of anime influence and things like that. So there's that generational change now. Like I've said it to you before, you know, I think it's a bit like American comics are a bit like rock music in that I feel like they've had their day. Manga is like rap music, becoming the norm cultural thing, the big cultural force. That's what I think is happening. But I do think that the if you like, the woke invasion of comics, where they attacked everybody and fired people and all that stuff, was, if you like the final nail. You know, so maybe some other strategy could have kept comics going, but that I think, as somebody pointed out, if you call half your readers Nazis consistently for 5 years, people just go, you know, I'll forget about it.
Do you know, I heard an interesting thing, though. I talked about this a while back. You might have heard it, and I was talking to the head of Disney marketing, and he said to me that they did some market research, and comic book readers, only 5% of them have active Twitter accounts, which was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard. So 95% of people don't see all this culture war stuff going on, you know, and they just get bored. They just get bored with comics. So it's probably, like you say, it's probably multifaceted, isn't it? It's probably the comics. Do you think also, like, Marvel movies maybe oversaturate something as well? So the only way you could get Avengers when I was a kid was to pick up an Avengers comic, you know, whereas now there's 10 TV shows a month, you know, this stuff's all out there. Do you think it's just oversaturated maybe?
Yeah, and I do think that there's a funny thing that once something goes from being a book or you know, not in all cases, but in many cases, once it becomes, just Hollywood gets it and milks it, it somehow takes the energy out of that was building on it, and then it peaks, and then it's sort of, it hasn't got any energy, culturally, any energy left at all, you know. So that's how I feel. I mean, I don't get excited generally about, oh, so-and-so's doing a new comic, like American comic. It's not, I don't wet my pants and have to run down the road to buy it. You know? Well,
I remember the first time I was in a comic shop, I spoke to John McShane, who I think, you know, like, he did the Aka books and comics in Glasgow, aka.
Oh, yes.
I remember saying to him, well, Superman's obviously your biggest selling comic, isn't it? And this was when I was like 13 or something. He said, nobody reads Superman. And I was like, how do you mean? He says, well, it was kind of big when Superman the movie came out for a little while, but then people like X-Men and Daredevil and everything there. I was like, what? And what I hadn't realized was you basically get a little sort of period where something's huge, like Twilight New Moon, you know, is the biggest thing one summer, and then they're selling the t-shirts for £1 the following year. So cinema almost drains the energy out of something, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think, you know, like, when it declines in the main two, Marvel, DC, I do think we're going to get, you know, you're seeing all the crowdfunding stuff, little bits springing here and there. Indie stuff is interesting, you know, like the Thought Bubble convention seems to be about the best convention now in the UK, and that's all indie based, really, isn't it? That's the vital one, the one that you need to go to, rather the other ones are all just taken over by TV actors.
Yes,
So I mean, you know, something will come up again, you know, but it may be in a different, you know, the manga, even the format may change away from American comics to the manga format. You know, the smaller book format might be the usual, you know, which could well happen.
I think that's inevitable. You know, I mean, I think the price point in comics is a huge problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's $4, where for
Yeah.
$10 you get a manga book with 200 pages. You know, so the economics just don't work anymore. But that's going to change page rates as well, because you know a big artist can make $1,500 a page over 200 pages. I mean, that's a huge investment before a book comes out as well. So I think the industry is going to realign itself, I think.
Yeah, yeah. But you're sort of straddling both things at the moment, aren't you? Doing very prolific on your comic releases, and you know, you're the production stuff you do with Netflix.
Yeah, it's funny. What I did intentionally is hold stuff back a year, and then I had double stuff coming out, you know. So in a way it worked out well too, because it meant guys like Frank Whiteley, Travis Charest weren't being rushed. So Travis had 3 years to draw a 26-page comic, which is great. And we just got in under the wire, you know. But like, but I kind of like that way of working, and it's meant that there's a barrage of stuff coming out now, you know. But I'm sure I'll change the way I work, you know, at some point in the future, because you have to adapt, don't you? Like, I mean, I'm aware the American market to me feels very like the way the British market felt in the 90s. Do you remember, like, at one point when we were working at 2000 AD and everything, there was Toxic, Strip, Judge Dredd magazine and everything. There was, and the generation before us had hundreds of British comics. I mean, Valiant, TV 21 and everything. You know? So there was a booming scene. And what happened was the best guys got soaked up by the Americans. So they used to come over on hunting trips, didn't they? And they would come and take away all the best scalps. And you maybe get 2 or 3 years at 2000 AD, and then they would come for you and take you away. And I think Hollywood's and television, you know, has done the same thing with comics, hasn't it? I think all the really commercial guys really were snapped up about 7 or 8 years ago. And, you know, I think comics is not anybody good that pops up is also picked up quickly by Hollywood and taken away, you know? So like, I think it's the same feeding frenzy that I saw in British comics. Now, I do feel the American industry could possibly go as a result of that, unless things block in the Hollywood side of things. Because, I mean, to put it in perspective, if you do a 6-issue Marvel series, you maybe get $20,000 an issue writing it. If you're one of the high-end writers, you get $120,000 for a 6-issue thing, right? Which is great dough, you know. But if you do a create your own series that becomes a movie, you maybe make 2 or 3 million, you know. And then every time they option it, every 2 years you get another $150,000, you know. So Marvel and DC can't possibly compete with that kind of cash. So you do find people coming in for a year and then they're gone, you know. Like, so that whole wave of guys like Brian Vaughan, Ed Brubaker, all those guys who were doing great books, you know, all off now, you know, all off in Hollywood. You know? So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if the American industry will go the same way as the British industry, or if there'll be a cyclical renaissance, you know, people who just want to work in comics.
Well, I think part of it is, I think you have your time, don't you? You know, like you have your 10-year run when you're absolutely on that hot streak.
Yeah.
And then if you stay in the industry, it's, you know, I mean, I suppose I'm not retired, but I'm not, you know, energetically in the comic industry, but I still keep an eye on it and see what's going on. You know, I'll flick through 2000 AD and a newsagent. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? All that stuff, all the Hollywood. What I think was good about all the Hollywood picking up on the comic stuff was that for a long. Do you remember that era, that period when comics were just, you know, like. So some company would express interest to IPC about Judge Dredd, and they'd almost be groveling around like poor cousin to the film industry.
Yeah.
Whereas so many people from comics have completely proved that they're at an equal level as theatre writers or film directors. You know, comic creators are just as good.
Yes.
I certainly, when I went to Hollywood first, I felt I was, you know, like subservient to them.
Yeah.
As I went through and saw more of what's going on and everything, I just thought, oh, actually, I'm as good as these people.
Yes. Yeah.
You know? And then when you actually do some good stuff, and like particularly with Mad Max Fury Road, that was like, to me, that was right. That's total proof that I now can compete on the best level with any of these other people. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, look at yourself and look at, say, Neil Gaiman. Look at, you know, I think that's been a good thing for comics, that we're not the arse end of the industry as we used to be. You know?
Well, I think everybody's stories are happier stories than the Golden Age guys and everything. You'd always hear these awful things with guys living in trailer parks who created multi-billion-dollar characters and everything, and I love the fact that the corporations aren't having the happy endings now. It's actually the creators, which is great, isn't it? The Turtles guys were probably the first guys. I remember hearing they made $800 million or something, and nobody knew how big it was going to get, and they'd kept the rights to everything, so they were getting breakfast cereal money and everything. And I love that. It's kind of like, do you know the story about Tarzan? Have you ever heard the story about Edgar Rice Burroughs? This is amazing. Like, Edgar Rice Burroughs created Tarzan, and it did so well that he bought a town. Right, he actually bought a town, and in California, and he called it Tarzana, and it still exists in California now. And I've got pals who live there who didn't realize it used to be Edgar Rice Burroughs' home, essentially. And it has a fire department and things like that. He'd made so much money from Tarzan. But basically, what happened was, the big companies were kind of like, we can't let these idiots hang on to everything. We need to keep everything, So for the next 60 years or so, everybody got screwed. So Jack Kirby, who should have been like Bill Gates, Jack Kirby dies with a modest pension and everything, and I kind of love the idea that post 1990 or so, that's not been the case, and the comic guys kind of get ownership of what they created.
Yeah, I mean, I've kept ownership of most of my creator-owned stuff.
Yeah.
With Pete, the stuff I did with Pete, we both own it, and other things I've kept, Dream Gang, etc. But now and then I will create something knowing that the publisher owns it, just to get something out.
Yes, yeah. You got to take a hit sometimes,
Yeah, like when I decided after I'd done about 15 years in movies, I wanted to go back to comics and just drawing and create a character. Like with the Sorcerer's Zilk, like Rebellion. The main thing for me was when I came back to England after being in LA for so long, you look at the comic scene, what can you buy from a newsagent? And it's only 2000 AD. There's other kids stuff with toys attached to them. But that was all that was there. So I just thought, well, 2000 AD is the only venue where you can create something, get it out, and some weirdo little kid like I was when I was 14 might see it, read it in perhaps some newsagent in Doncaster or something. That's what I wanted to do, was just put something out into the ether in England, and that meant giving it up to 2000 AD. I thought, well, British comics don't have a Doctor Strange character. Let's create one for them and do a British kind of Doctor Strange. So that was the thinking with Sorcerer's Zilk. And but that was done knowing that I'm not going to own it.
Yeah.
And Knacker of the Stars was I thought that's probably my farewell to 2000 AD. So, I don't care if I own that or not, really. I mean, it was a nice idea, but to me, it was it's a whimsical little thing. It's not going to set the world on light, but I wanted to do it.
You never know what's going to blow up as well, don't you? Like, whenever everybody says, "Oh, people are getting out of print," digital comics are the thing or whatever, then suddenly manga in print is gigantic, or Dogman is even bigger, And I love that, like people said, little kids weren't reading actual physical books anymore, and now my kids are obsessed with them. Dogman just changed the game the way Harry Potter did 20 years ago. But I never. That's why I'm always optimistic, and people always talk about the fact that American comics are doing so badly, but you just think American readers are still picking up comics. They want comics, but they just don't want what Marvel and DC are doing.
Yeah. I wonder. I mean, I won't go into why I think that's the case. I think we covered it, but I mean, I saw your email on not Twitter. You did a Twitter thing on Batman Begins. You thought it was like the best superhero film of the last 20 years or something.
I couldn't believe how good it was.
Was that you who put that on?
Yeah. I was on a flight back from Oman the other day, and maybe I was hallucinating. I'd had 7 glasses of wine, right? So I watched Gladiator, which I really loved. I hadn't watched that in years. And then I stuck on Batman Begins. And I liked the second and third films, but they're a bit bloated, they're awfully long, And Batman Begins was 2 hours, 9 minutes, same length as Superman the movie. And it just felt really tight and really good. And they thought it all through really well. They did Ra's al Ghul well, a good twist and everything. It was a good film.
Because I watched that Nolan trilogy a couple of months ago just to see what I haven't seen them for about 10 years.
Same with me.
But I thought Batman Begins. I thought its third act wasn't strong. That was my only thing. I was a bit tapping my feet as it went through a kind of an inevitable conclusion. My feeling about Ra's al Ghul, whatever his name was, was he was a sort of an okay villain. He wasn't a great villain, and he was better at the beginning of the film than he was as the major villain at the end of the film for some reason.
I kind of like that idea at the end, though, where the League of Shadows has been taken out decadent societies and everything. There was something quite cool about that.
Yeah, I like. Yeah, I mean, there's good stuff in it.
Yeah,
I do think the Heath Ledger, the first two acts of the second film are the standout of those trilogy, and the third one's quite good. Although Tom Hardy, you can't actually understand anything he's saying. Very weird, that isn't it? They decided not to dub it in.
It's so bizarre for authenticity as well.
He also chose a voice that was like a Cornish sort of bare knuckle fighter or something. Hear his voice.
Did I ever tell you about the time I met Christian Bale?
No.
This is when he was playing Bruce Wayne. It was the maddest thing. I was on the Batman Dark Knight set, and he was talking in an American accent, and we were sort of chatting. And then I realized about 10 minutes into the conversation, it was like a Kaiser Soze moment, that he was in character as Bruce Wayne while he was talking to me. And he's a method actor, so everything he was saying to me wasn't Christian Bale replying, it was Bruce Wayne replying. And
it said something really British to it. Do you think it would have broken him?
Well, I think because he wasn't even shooting that day, he was there just watching the other actors, but he was still Bruce Wayne. It was the most incredible thing. And it was actually my wife, I was telling my wife this recently, and she said to me, you should have said, while he was in the head of Bruce Wayne, you should have said to him, do you know there's a rumor you're Batman? just to see what he did, But the second one, really good. Heath Ledger's amazing in it and everything, but first one, I think is so underrated. I really fell in love with it again when I watched it. It was a good film.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, I remember. I thought they were good. It was a decent trilogy. The third act of the Heath Ledger one is a bit boring because you don't really care about Bruce Wayne's romantic interest, and the guy playing Two-Face it's not as exciting. As soon as Heath Ledger goes from the movie, it's lost all its energy. I thought it was a bit of a tactical error to take him out on the end of the second act and have the third bit as sort of wrap up about all the parts of the film that aren't as interesting.
Act 3 should always be bigger than Act 2, and it's bigger than Act 1. Or else you come out you don't even know why, but it's a little subconscious thing, isn't it? You come out slightly deflated. So if there's so many films you see where there's a great opening and then the film goes down from there, but your ending's the most important thing, isn't it? But I was going to ask you another thing as well. Is I know that you're quite a spiritual guy. You always kind of have been. I remember whenever I'd read your comics, you'd be talking about Aborigines and everything. All this kind of thing has always interested you. But as time's gone on, you've got kind of a bit Christian as well. You've got quite into Christianity again. What do you think? Is it?
Well, that's, what it is that when you're a teenager, you reject Christianity, or you sort of run it through the logic.
Yeah.
Thing. And as you come out of the familial, I was raised in an Irish Catholic background.
Yeah.
As you sort of expand out of that, the outside world sort of thinks it's all a bit silly, and it's all Richard. What's that guy Dawkins, and it's all that, and anybody of any decent intellectual capacity doesn't believe in Immaculate Conception, but believes in evolution, whatever, all that stuff. So so I went on a giant exploration. I did find I was still interested, like Dr. Stephen Strange, in Eastern mysticism.
Yeah,
me and Pete had a common interest, which came out in Rogan Gosh in the end. But so I did actually study the Vedanta and have really become familiar with it over about 30 years.
Yeah,
the Advaita, as it's called, which is a branch of it, and that's called non-duality. Non-duality Advaita is it's like what Zen is to Buddhism. Buddhism's more of a religion, and Zen is a slap round the face. It's one's an instantaneous waking up, and the other one is devotional practices, saints, demons, angels, all that sort of stuff. That's Buddhism. Zen Buddhism cuts all that out, and it goes straight to the heart of the matter. So, because what in that practice they're trying to induce a waking out, a sort of slap to the mind that takes you out of the common 9-to-5 type of mindset, which a religion doesn't really take you out of. It's a devotional path, whereas Zen is a direct path. So in the Vedanta of Hinduism is all the same as Buddhism. It's all, multi-faced gods and demons and all the rest of it, which doesn't interest me. But the branch of it, which is like Zen Buddhism, is called Advaita, or non-duality, and that is about the slap upside the head to wake you up.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I because they say outrageous things in some of these, like there's a couple of books a couple of guys that I've read, some Indian philosophers, Nisargadatta, and they say the most outlandish things. You think that can't be right, that's complete nonsense. But somehow it kind of worms itself into your head, and you're thinking, well, why are they saying that? Why are they saying this? And so just by studying it and going back to it, and then I'd put it away for a couple of years, I think, oh, this is a load of bollocks, and get into whatever, but I always kind of get drawn back to it. Anyway, what then interested me was I like churches. I like to walk into churches. There's a distinct atmosphere in a church, or a good one. You go to a medieval church in Norfolk or something, and people have been worshipping there for 1,000 years, and it feels like it's an encapsulated space of something different to the space outside it. So and Christianity, which it doesn't promote, has a mystical tradition. St. John of the Cross and people like that, the Dark Night of the Soul, and the direct revelation. And so I've just started to look into, well, what's the Christian mystics? What are they about? Because they're basically, once you know what they're saying, like in Zen Buddhism and then in non-duality, they've got to be saying the same thing in Christianity, really. It can't be any different. You can't suddenly find out you're made out of plastic. We're all made out of the same musculature. So I'm assuming that we all have the same propensity to wake up, as in any tradition. So it seemed to me crazy. I'm sitting in the middle of an incredibly great tradition, Christianity, and architecturally, painting, art, literature. In fact, I've been reading C.S. Lewis's book recently called Surprised by Joy. It's about his movement from atheism into waking up into the revelation. So I find that interesting. I'm just following where it goes. I don't know where it's going, but I'm finding it interesting, and it seemed to me stupid to disregard it. Because of a prior desire to reject previous conditioning. What I'd seen in Christianity as a kid, then as a teenager, was I really objected to original sin. Because I saw the same technique then being used by the left with whiteness.
Oh, right,
So it's exactly the same psychological trap, is that if you're born with original sin, how am I going to get rid of it? Come here, we've got we got the way out, right? So I got how the psychological trap and then hook works. So when I saw it being repeated in things like the original sin of whiteness, for example, from the left, or doing that same psychological game, that sort of interested, it was seeing it operating, thinking, oh, that's the same thing they're doing. That got me kind of thinking then about, I must have a look back into Christianity again. Also, in my personal life, I had a situation which was really serious, a sort of an illness, and an instantaneous healing occurred. And it took me about 20 years to admit that something happened, rather than it was a kind of accident. And I had to say, okay, look, and then so I started to, under the table, start reading stuff on, miracles, miracle cures. What is that all about? What's all that sort of spiritual healing about? When you see those American preachers going, say the name of the Lord, and somebody falls to the floor. There's that kind of nonsense side of it. To me, that seems to be theatrical. It's a bit like going to an Anthony Robbins thing and punching the air, going, I'm going to make it. You're in it. And then it dissipates when you're not in it 2 days later, when you're sitting at home going, So I saw it as further rather than, so that's why I don't mean that. I mean, so I started reading accounts of miraculous healing, exorcisms, things like that. I started reading and looking at some of those priests that talk about exorcism. And there was an interesting priest I saw on YouTube talking about after a spiritual awakening, they're the gifts of the spirit. And he talked about the gift of discernment. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I get that. And I immediately got what he meant. The ability to see through sort of bullshit to the heart of the matter. These kinds of things. And I've always kind of had that as a human, as a person, you know, sort of discernment about, I wasn't taken in by things. I could see JFK was obviously not shot just by Oswald. And then, you know, an attraction towards, you know, a deep dive into conspiracy when I was younger, and Maid Russell and, you know, all that kind of stuff, you know, when it was very obscure and underground. It was part of the counterculture, that stuff back then. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. I've just sort of started to say, okay, stop saying, right, the least hip thing you can be is a Christian, or the least hip thing you can be into is Christianity. Put that aside and just say, right, what's it about? What's the message? Who is Jesus Christ? What is spiritual healing? What is all that stuff? Because I'd like to know what that's about.
And were you interested in this as a kid? Or, I mean, because you're like me, you're a natural contrarian as well. So as a kid, were you sort of, was your mum talking about this stuff and you weren't interested, or was it something at an early age?
It was just the family milieu of an Irish Catholic thing. So, you know, you have to say the rosary when you're 5 years old, that kind of thing. But honestly, I never really gave it much thought. I mean, until the last 5 years or so, when in thinking back on my life, thinking about this period where I was in a very bad predicament, and then being sprung out of it instantly, thinking, okay, I must really be honest about that rather than dismiss it as an accident. You know? So
can you hang on a wee second? I'm just going to plug this in because the charge, I noticed, is just wait 2 seconds. It's 1 inch too short to get to the. Hang on, I'm going to try and pull this table.
Do you have to move the entire house over?
That's it. Smart.
What house are you in at the moment? Is that the one you're still renting?
Yeah, I'm still renting this one because we're doing up the other place. 18 months it's taken to do up the other place. It's crazy. So this. The style in here is really weird as well. You know, it's kind of Trumpian. It's everything's kind of gold and glass and everything. You know? But none of it's our stuff. So all our stuff is still in storage. You know, so like.
Is the place across the road? Is that finished yet, or is that?
No, another 5 months. Another 5 mons. I know it's a lot. There's 17 guys working on it every day, but they're doing a good job. This was the schedule that it was supposed to be. You know, but like. These things takes time. I'm trying to be zen about it, like you say. But sorry, just to get back to what you were saying. I mean, because there is a connection between comic books, I always think, and religion. You know, because everybody else lives in the real world, don't they? But we live in this like Doctor Strange kind of world, don't we? Like the supernatural is normal to us. Yeah. And from a very young age, you know, like we can accept the most out there ideas, can't they? You know, so religion always felt quite connected. Like the Sacred Heart even looked like Superman to me. It was like a red cape and a symbol on the chest.
Oh yeah. Well, that's interesting that you mentioned Doctor Strange, because to me, the greatest achievement of the Silver Age is that eternity storyline that Steve Ditko basically wrote, Stanley dialogue.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Where it does the actual whole story of Doctor Strange. He's the arrogant surgeon. He's in the accident. He becomes an alcoholic. He hangs around at the docks. He hears the word eternity whispered on the air by a few Chinese dockers or something, and then he takes a boat to the Asia, and then he travels through the Tibet, through the mountains, finds a guru, studies with the guru. He's then given choices between, you can either get worldly power or you can keep going and become it. You know, so it's the classic story of enlightenment, which you know, and I used to read all those books like Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse, and Steppenwolf was another one. And these are all big books in the 60s and 70s. I read everything, all those Carlos Castaneda books, all that stuff, half of which turn out to be bollocks. But that's that sort of, I suppose, in a way, because what Ditko's expressing there was that archetypal story, that when you're younger in life, the idea is to fulfill the ambitions of youth. You know, which is what I did, you know, get my comics out, create characters, get them published, then do some films, do Mad Max in particular, the film that I was obsessed with all my life, and then deliver that nicely and go, okay, that's done. And after that, think, okay, I feel like I've done all that. I want to mop up the comics now and just do a few more. And now I feel like as you get older, and I'm mid-60s now, so the next big event is probably going to be dying. So but I'm in a life,
There'll be a Marvel crossover before then. Come on, there's more events to come.
You sort of, I was reading, like in a lot of cultures, the older members of society gradually pass on the chores, etc., to the children and run the tobacco shop or whatever it is they've got, and then they devote themselves in the final part of their life to more spiritual matters.
Yes,
that's the kind of in Asia, that's quite an accepted. India, places like that. I mean, this guy Nisargadatta, this Indian philosopher, he did all that. He ran a couple of tobacco shops in Delhi or somewhere, and then gradually left them to his kids and started studying and gradually started teaching younger people about what he knew. So that's quite a standard archetypal pattern. So I guess I'm sort of probably just in that part of the life cycle doing that.
I think you also hit a point in life, and it's probably middle age on, where you realize what was important to you at 20 or 25 or whatever isn't as important. So and things that are interesting to you as well, so like getting to a certain point in a career, you're going to be replaced by somebody else, that's you're only existing for that point in time, aren't you? But the spiritual side of you is something that's hopefully eternal, isn't it? Like if you believe human consciousness is eternal, you start preparing for that, don't you? That suddenly becomes much more interesting.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I mean, when I was young, it seemed when I was a teenager, young man in my 30s, Richard Dawkins, reading about quantum physics, etc. All that was the idea of, spirituality. That all seemed an old absurd belief to the modern, atheist mind. Now I find the idea of atheism absurd.
Yes, yeah. The certainty of it. The certainty of it.
Yeah. So, we both listen to people like Cliff High and, all that kind of stuff, where there's a sort of, there's an intelligent discussion about that stuff rather than just, piousness is not attached to it, for example.
I mean, even everybody, it doesn't take long when you sit in the pub or you're on a car journey with somebody for somebody to have had a supernatural experience that Richard Dawkins can't explain. And it's not your crazy friends, it's usually your very normal friends, isn't it? They'll be like, they saw something weird, they saw something really odd one night. Like my brother-in-law, who was most blue-collar guy, just regular guy, when he was in Birmingham one time, he said I don't know if I ever told you this, he was out for a drink with his pals, he was about 19, and he nipped up a lane for a pee. And when he was walking up the lane, he looked up and he saw something up in a tree that wasn't human. Right. And this is a guy who literally doesn't believe in anything, right? Didn't believe in God, nothing, right? And he was embarrassed telling me this, and years later, he says, I looked up and I saw this thing. It was about 9 feet long, and it was on the branches of a tree, and it was looking in at people in a house having a dinner party late at night with the lights on. And then it looked around and snapped around and saw him and started moving down the tree towards him. And the way he described it to me is he said it was like Jungle Book, Kaa and Jungle Book, where the eyes are kind of swirling, and it was coming towards him, moving towards him. And he said he couldn't move. He was frozen with fear. And then his pals shouted, hurry up and everything, and it kind of broke the spell, and the thing disappeared. It just shot off over trees and disappeared. And you're like, what the hell is that? How does Richard Dawkins explain this? And it's weird, isn't it? Like, maybe it's Scottish people in particular, everybody and Irish are the same, aren't they? Everybody's got like a weird supernatural story, isn't it? And that the rumor has to start somewhere with all this stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I think the Celtic genetic kind of thing is different to the Anglo-Saxon.
Yes, very much.
There's a different sort of soul quality in there.
Yeah.
The Anglo-Saxon one's very bright. I think it's very sharp and to the point, and the Irish one, the Celtic thing has a deeper kind of it's soulful sort of thing or something. So I think I mentioned that's why I think you get in the Anglo-Irish or Anglo-Celtic person, you get a kind of an interesting fusion of the soul and that intellectual brightness, creatively. Lennon McCartney, as you mentioned, the Gallagher brothers. Rotten. It's amazing how Morrissey, all these people and Ma, that they're all Celtic, but with the brightness of that sharp British stuff,
Yeah, that's interesting, But it's funny because I think the Irish in particular, but the Scots too, they're a little bit closer to all the magic and all that, aren't they? Like those kind of stories. Like my mum would tell me creepy stories like this, you know, growing up, that happened to her dad or whatever, or her granddad and everything. And I think it's part of our culture in a way that I don't think it is in England. Like the Anglo-Saxons don't have that storytelling tradition like that, or the idea that something supernatural isn't that far from the natural, you know?
Yeah. Well, where I am in the west of Ireland, you know, it's quite thinly populated, and I'm in a small town. But if I go out, I'm right in the country, and the place is dotted with things like holy wells, which are old spring wells that were used and then became Christianized as Christianity spread, and so you get St. Bridget's well or St. Michael's well. But I sort of started getting quite interested in them, started visiting them, and you know, noting them down, and just have a strong interest in the Celtic fairy lore. And I was lucky enough when I was a kid, when I was here, that my grandfather and all the old farmers, you know, around would have stories about the night this happened to me, and I'd write them all down. So I had all these about 6 stories that nobody had, because just and I ended up writing my university thesis on the fairy lore of West Clare, which is so I did, but I've always had an affinity to things like sorcery, fairy lore, that kind of stuff, rather than sci-fi, you know, laser beams. I'm not so, the techno thing didn't interest me as much as the Celtic twilighty supernatural stuff, you know. Less interested in ghosts, more sort of, you know, a couple of, in that 133 section I mentioned in my local library, they had a couple of books on this lady called Alexandra David Neal. Have you ever heard of her?
No, who's that?
Yeah, it's amazing nobody's made a movie about her. She was this woman who was like French society woman, about late 1800s, 1900s sort of era. Sort of that age of people going exploring. Well, she was, you know, destined for high society life and everything, and rebelled against it, and went off and started and joined some explorations with some people going into Africa and stuff. But she became obsessed with going to Asia, and particularly Tibet, which was then a forbidden land. So she actually disguised herself as a man and went into Tibet, got in, and journeyed to the Forbidden Kingdom, which is where Lhasa was. And she ended up staying there for on and off for 10 years and learning, you know, the techniques of the adepts in Tibet. But Tibet was this kind of super technological center, but of technology of the mind rather than, you know, Steve Jobs. And they sussed she was a woman fairly quickly, but because they were so impressed with her, she was allowed to stay, and she was the only woman who became an abbot or studied to be an abbot in Lhasa. And she wrote a book about her thing and documented certain things that she claims that she saw, you know, like the Tibetans used to use sonics to levitate objects, which is sort of feasible, you know. Cymatics is the science of it, where it's a science thing that I've always used in my stories. I like the idea that sound can manipulate matter, which it can. Like operating a shattering, you know, all that stuff. And but she would witness things like in Tibet, they have these incredibly long horns that are about, you know, like bugles. They're about, you know, 30 feet long. And they all get into certain positions with the horns, and they start these breathing things, where they set up this constant sound. They would levitate objects placed at the center.
That's amazing.
Alexandra David Neal, there's a book about her, and there's a book she wrote. Both of them were in the library. I was reading it when I was about 13. And of course, that was feeding into Doctor Strange and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
It was always exciting when you came across something like that, like a Colin Wilson or something, wasn't it? You know, like...
It's funny because I did go into the Chaos Magic Aleister Crowley thing. But in the end, I always thought it was that point in Doctor Strange where he can either become Baron Mordo, because you're either going to use it for egoic betterment, or you're going to say, okay, that I can do that. And I can stay at that station, or keep going on the train to see where it goes. You know, and I feel like there was a point where I was interested in all that, you know, you know, it was a couple of years where I read loads of stuff, and there was some good stuff in it, particularly a guy called Peter Carroll, who was really interesting. But I felt there was more than, you know, self-aggrandizement through, you know, magical manipulation. One could go further into, you know, essentially the path of non-duality, the spiritual path, rather than the going so far and then using it to just create better circumstances where you are, you know.
I think that's the difference between magic and prayer, isn't it? You know, like in the sort of Crowley sense magic, you know, where it's about self, isn't it? It's all about betterment of the individual, and there's a selfishness that's encouraged within Luciferianism and things like this, you know. So whereas what appeals to me about religion, like Christianity or a lot of others, is thinking of the common good, you know, like thinking of other people, and then you're enriched by living in a better place, really, aren't you? By bringing everybody up around you, you're in a better place.
Well, I think my understanding is that the end result of the spiritual path is that it just fades out into that there isn't anything, that it's the dissolution of the individual self is the biggest thing. It used to freak me out. But when I experienced some of those things, it was like I actually got frightened and couldn't go there. You know, people talking about, oh yeah, I lost my ego on an acid trip or something, but it comes back again. But when are you prepared to go through the door where it's not going to come back?
Yes, yeah.
That was the thing, and I was too scared to. It started to happen, and I withdrew from it because
were you doing DMT or something, or was this just?
Oh no, there wasn't a DMT thing, because that's like a rocket ship into it. And then most DMT accounts are by people who are just saying, yeah, then I met self-transforming machine elves, then I saw this realm, and it's all phenomena. And past phenomena. They haven't gone past that bit. That's why I actually get bored with all that DMT acid stuff now, you know, psychedelia or whatever. It was a big influence at a certain time.
It was a 90s thing.
It's not the last station on the line, though. It goes beyond that, you know. In Ireland, they have where I am. There's a play area. There was basically it was something that I've become reading up about and become aware of, which a lot of people don't know about, is that there was a terrible Holocaust in Ireland called the famine. And it's sold in the history books, and generally the public understand it. Oh, the Irish lived on potatoes, and when the potato blight happened, they all died, you know, a million of them. And that then kicked off the mass emigration and the coffin ships to America, and then anybody misbehaving was then carted off to Van Diemen's Land, which was Australia. So, and the population was devastated. You know, it went from 8 million down to about 3 and a bit, right? So that was 150 years ago, and so it's actually not that long ago. And one of the things, and the British ran Ireland as a colonial output, and they were fucking brutal, you know. And the reason the famine happened is that the British were taking all the other crops and the cattle and everything and exporting them while the Irish people died. I
didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, they'd sit on the edge of the docks, watching the ships laden with grain, vegetables, turnips, everything. And the Irish were just left with potatoes. And that's why they died, is because the Brits took all the other food.
I mean, that's left out of the British history books, isn't it? You don't see that shit.
Yeah. And but what the interesting thing I was going to explain was they had poorhouses and workhouses at that time. And that because of the sort of, you know, Protestant attitude, the Irish, the impoverished Irish had to work for some food, whether it be just mashed up potatoes or something, or whatever they get, because they weren't going to give it to them for nothing. They had to work for it. So they made them build these roads in the countryside that don't go anywhere.
Right.
They're called famine roads.
Right.
And there's all they're overgrown now, but you can follow the famine road, because they'd often build a bordering out of rocks, you know, so you'd get stone walls. And it's usually grass by now, it's overgrown. But what's interesting is sometimes they're gravelly and, you know, like a dirt road. And gradually, as you follow the road, it's going up the side of a mountain. And you think, where's it going? And it just dissipates because all the people building it died. Right. And so the road just goes and then it dissipates and you're sort of just in the landscape.
Wow.
And that's what the spiritual path is at the end.
it's so beautifully symbolic, isn't it? That's
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. That's what
yeah.
I had a great understanding walking this famine road,
Yeah,
thinking this is what happens is you get to the road just disappears. And meaning your ego and personality, and I want to be that, you're a fucker, and all that stuff. It gradually goes away. I
But
mean,
do you think so though? Because I mean, human consciousness. Why would it, the thing I always wonder is if everything in the physical world doesn't die, if physics tells us that things just change and become something else,
right.
why would human consciousness be the one exception to this? Why would it not just morph into something else? I mean, one of my nephews, he had weird reincarnation experiences when he was a little kid, and he was too young to be making it up. That's what was really interesting, So when he was 4, he was talking about his brother who used to come and visit him, and we were like, "You don't have a brother?" And he said, "No, my brother from the old days, And they were in World War I together. And he said, "Oh, we were in the war," and he said at night time it was weird little things. He said we used to dig little holes in the ground, and we'd sleep at night in the holes because we knew we couldn't get shot. And you would see the bullets going over our heads while we were lying there and everything, And he gave really odd memories that he couldn't possibly have, So, like, I mean, would you discount that then? Do you think consciousness evaporates back into a big universal blob kind of at the end? Or?
The oceanic consciousness. I don't know, but funny enough, though, I have in reading who I consider the more advanced spiritual people, because you hit you hit Deepak Chopra first, and gradually you get rid of him. Then you get Eckhart Tolle, and you think, "I'll get rid of him," and gradually you get down to the real people, the ones you haven't heard of. You have to dig them out. And a lot of them say is that if you realize the true self, what is it that reincarnates? Because what reincarnates are all the impulses and the unfulfilled desires and all that stuff.
That's interesting. Yeah.
That complex of stuff is then attracted into a zygote and then comes back out again, right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
So
the purest self is gone,
Yeah, there's a school of thought that says that sees reincarnation as a trap, that you're going to keep running around on it all the time. So, and there's another school of thought, in Buddhism, things like that, which says you reincarnate and get incrementally better and improve until you, right. What I'm finding interesting about Christianity, which is different to those philosophies, is it says that there is a personal relationship available with God, which is different to the movement towards the oceanic impersonal. So that's why I've become interested in, because the director of Doctor Strange film, what was his name?
Scott Derrickson.
Scott Derrickson. I was following him on Twitter for a while, and he dropped a tweet which was really amazing, and it just kind of slapped me around the head. And it just said, "The universe is not indifferent because I am in it." And I just thought, fucking hell. And that's what kicked me onto then the model I had for most of my life was, well, there's us humans clinging on this little planet, and there's this giant, cold, indifferent universe. That model is what I had in my head. And that little thing he said made me go, fuck, I am part of the universe. There's not the universe and me.
Yes.
I'm actually part of it, right? And my compassion or my jealousy or my ambition, that's all part of the universe. Same, this hand exists as much as Saturn, and I just thought, wow, I've been suffering a mental delusion that there's me and the rest of the cold, indifferent universe. So I thought, hang on a minute. And that's what kicked me then into reconsidering. I've got to look into Christianity, which says that, because the Eastern religions tend to, if you like, demote and then deny the personal, the personal self, like, with your likes and dislikes, your loves, your hates. And whereas Christianity is allowing that and saying that exists as much as, the planet Saturn. So that's why I'm giving it another look. It's interesting that guy Derrickson, wasn't he a theology student or something?
He's a big time Christian, actually, Scott. So he's a very thoughtful guy. He's he's an interesting guy. He did an exorcism movie, I think, before he did Doctor Strange.
The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Did he do that?
I don't think it was that. He did a couple of horrors certainly before.
I've seen one of his. I can't remember which one it was. It was quite
Insidious
good.
or
Insidious.
Insidious. He did,
that was good. Yeah, that was pretty good, wasn't it? Yeah, it's a shame about that first Doctor Strange film, because it's actually quite good until the ending with Dormammu, with that horrible CGI Dormammu. Did you see it?
Do you know, I think the Marvel movies, the minute the CGI comes in, I just switch off. Like the third act is always a CGI fest, isn't it?
They
And
also
then
did
there's no stakes,
but they did a time loop plot.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was a mistake. Never do full time loop, But that was doing a time loop, keep coming back all the time. Those things never work.
Yeah.
And I thought it was quite a good movie up until the last sort of 15 minutes.
It's funny. I feel as if I really like Benedict Cumberbatch, but I actually think he was miscast. I think there's a lightness to him that Joaquin Phoenix is who they wanted, and I think Joaquin Phoenix would have given it a real. He feels like the Strange in Doctor Strange.
There's more gravitas in him, isn't there?
Yeah. Cumberbatch feels like a boy almost, doesn't he? I think.
Yeah. No, I was very interested to see I thought Scott Derrickson was an interesting choice.
Yeah.
Because he seemed to have the intellectual hinterland to do it.
Yeah.
Justice, the mystical search part of it. It's a bit like Lost Horizons or The Razor's Edge, these standard stuff. But
have you seen the original Lost Horizon? The 1930s one with Ron Coleman. I only discovered it about 10 years ago, and now it's in my top 10 films. I'm obsessed with it.
It's a beautiful film, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. There was 8 minutes missing or something, and that's why the BBC never showed it when we were growing up, because you only had the sound, and they put some photographs in to try and sort of fill it out. So when did you see it? How did you see it? Was it a DVD?
I just remember saw it on TV at some point,
and
then went to see it at a film club or maybe art college. It was art college.
Right, yeah. And it's so weird because it's a movie that's memory hold now. It's not up there with, all the kind of classic 40s films and everything. And this is a 30s film, but it's not regarded in the same way.
No, it's not like it is. I think people do, it is sort of, it hasn't totally disappeared at the memory hole.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? When you're young, you have that displaced immortality drive to, I'm going to achieve something and make my mark in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you put everything into that. And then what they don't tell you is that your mark is made in smoke.
Yes.
Dissipates. And all that, the urgency and originality of Strange Days or something is now just back in the mists of time when any of that mattered,
But it's funny because I see people say, oh, that didn't age well, and I'm like, but that doesn't matter, because it was absolutely perfect for its moment, and just to appreciate it for what it was within its moment. Like pop in particular shouldn't age well, it belongs to 1988 or whatever, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think Lost Horizon, though, it's funny, like it's a movie I discovered. You can get it for anybody who wants to see it who's listening to this. You can get it on BitChute for nothing. Like if you type it into BitChute, you'll get the whole movie. But I think it's one of the greatest films ever made. And Capra, weirdly, I don't know. Did you ever hear the story of the movie used to be an hour and a half longer? And it's crazy, an hour and a half. And what happened was, the movie's about 2 hours. So he had a 3.5 hour cut of it. And what he did was he screened it for a test audience in 1932 or whatever. And everybody was howling, laughing at the film, like saying it was the most ridiculous thing they'd ever seen. And he couldn't figure it out. And what happened was the more esoteric stuff didn't actually come in until an hour and a half, 90 minutes into the movie. So it was a very realistic picture, and then it went supernatural, And he left his house and he walked for 2 days in the Hollywood Hills trying to rationalize, like, this is my masterpiece, why do people not like it? And then he realized it was because the audience had been lulled into thinking this was a realistic movie, and then it goes a little crazy, So he said he literally went to the studio, burned the first couple of reels, and started the movie 90 minutes in, and then he screened it for other people, and they absolutely loved it, and it was a big hit.
Yeah, I always love that film. It's those really old films like the original King Kong and stuff. They're so old now that they've almost got the feeling of reading an old fairy book or something. They get a kind of translucence of time about them. There's a very nice film that's sort of a bit similar to Lost. What's it called? The Razor's Edge with Tyrone Power.
I've never seen that. I love Tyrone Power, but I've never seen that.
That's a really good one. That's about the Doctor Strange type quest thing, and he comes back to modern society.
Because that was very much a pre-1938 trope, wasn't it? Like I always love to look at this stuff, and like Superman was a bit of a turning point, because prior to that it had been explorers going somewhere interesting, an ordinary guy going somewhere interesting, like Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers.
It's Paradise Lost, isn't it? It's the you know, the reclamation of the idyll of childhood.
And Superman was actually the first time something from somewhere else came here. And then that became the thing, you know, like it was it flipped it on its head. So those Flash Gordon type heroes were rare after 1938.
Yeah. It's interesting you like that Richard Donner film, which I appreciate a lot as well, because it's got a genuine heart about it. There's a lightheartedness in it, you know, of goodness, which Christopher Reeve was able to project. It's interesting. Henry Cavill had a bit of it, but not as much. And it's an interesting thing with Superman. You can't. I feel like Zack Snyder and all these people getting him killing people and firing beams at them. They seem to have lost the quality of Superman that was so appealing.
I think it will come back though, because James Gunn doing this reboot, you know, like James is very sus, you know. I think he knows what he's doing, and I think he gets it when the little sort of things I've seen him say talking about it. You know, he'll be like. You know, he gets the essence of what Superman is. Where I think Zack Snyder, I think, is a really brilliant director, but he just doesn't really suit that type of material.
No, that's what he's. There's a couple of Zack Snyder films I think are very good. I just felt Superman was too heavy-handed all in how he was treated in all those films.
I mean, I'd love to see Superman go full-on bonkers, and I think James is the sort of guy that could do it, like Bottle City of Candor, Comet Super Horse and all that. Like, people can handle that stuff now, weirdly, in a way that, you know, everything had to look like the Matrix 20 years ago, didn't it? The X-Men had to look like the Matrix. They were all in dark costumes and everything. Whereas now I think you could get away with Crypto the Superdog. I think you could put that in a Superman film. In
there. God, wouldn't it be funny to do a Kurt Swan type Superman?
Kids would love it though, wouldn't they? I mean, my kids are obsessed with Superman, right? One of my kids in particular, like, it's weird, like she can tell you anything from the 50s, everything, right? And the Superman Batman movie came out a few years back, and I couldn't take her to see it. And the Justice League came out, and I couldn't take her because it was a little dark and a little scary for her, you know. So I'd love a super. Did you see Super Pets, the animated feature?
I haven't seen it. No, I'm probably going to give it a look.
It's like pure Kurt Swan Superman. It's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely
good. Yeah, I've got 2 animated things to look at. Puss in Boots, that new cat. I just want to see. I have to look at this stuff just to see what the CGI is like and where they're at. You know, it might be a reasonable film. I don't know, but
I went to see it. Like, my youngest is 9, and she's obsessed with Puss in Boots. Like, she talks about Puss in Boots like every day. It's weird, you know. And so the first 20 minutes is really good, and then it kind of straight.
That's right. Probably that'll be enough to see. I just want to see how what's the fur like? How are they doing? You know, all that stuff.
It's next level. I mean, this stuff now is just incredible. You know, like, I mean, because you've obviously got your big background in animation and everything as well. You know, which we hardly touched on, but I mean. I was talking to some animators recently, you know, some directors animated stuff, and they were saying for 70 million now you could do something that would have been 150 million before, you know, and it's possibly coming down again. You know, you could maybe start doing really high quality Toy Story type stuff for about 50 for a film, you know, which is amazing, and it looks spectacular, you know.
Yeah.
Did you see The Bad Guys?
I saw the trailer for it. Looked quite nice. Is it any good?
Really good. It's great. And I think it was about 50
good script,
Great script, really great script, and great characters as well. But I think it was like 40 or 50 million, but it was really great for that.
Yeah.
Well, listen, before we wrap up, actually, I've got to ask, the number one thing everybody said to me was ask Brendan what's going on eyesight-wise and everything, because I know there's been sort of improvement. There's been some good stuff, and I know because you put a tweet up about it a few weeks ago. I remember people were freaking out, you know. So what's happening?
Well, it was drawing Knacker of the Stars. It took me ages to do it, and it was only 18 pages. You know, 3 6-page episodes, and I could hardly, like, after an hour or so, I could hardly see the page. You know, because I'm having to like hold the page that close to my eyes, and I'm thinking this is getting ridiculous. You know, I've got to basically admit the game's up. You know, and I was drawing on paper with pens and inks and stuff because I originally had thought about, you know, going Wacom and Procreate and all that stuff. But when I added up the hours I was spending on a screen, you know, from the morning when you get up, do your emails, then you go and work on the screen for a day's work, then you check your emails in the evening, then you watch a Netflix or whatever. You think, Christ, that's like 12 to 14 hours on a screen every day. I just thought, no, I'm going to I'll go back to drawing on paper, and so I'm in real meat world reality for the art. But so anyway, so my eyes are just deteriorated through short-sightedness, and I just thought I have to let it go now. Really, I've and then it's went through a bit of it's a bit. God, is that it? Have I done it now? And then you start thinking, okay, well, that's what I've done. I can still write stuff. I can design stuff because it's bigger page stuff. And so I got in touch with an eye specialist, and then I went to see this good eye specialist in Dublin, and they did an operation on the worst eye, which has been very successful. It doesn't improve my eyesight; it stops it deteriorating, which is right. And then they'll do the second eye at a certain point because that was a stronger one, and they'll do the same again on that. And then there's another thing for them to do that I've got to wait about overall probably it'll be a year before I do the next thing, which will then should arrest any more decline.
Great.
And possibly increase the vision a bit.
That's all. I didn't know that. That's great.
Well, the other thing I did as well then is I went out and bought an iPad Pro and some and all that, a stencil, so I can actually enlarge images big enough for me to see them, and then shrink them back down. Do it digitally, which I sort of have been resisting. Really, I've tried to stay with paper, a pen, and all that stuff. But I think if I do want to do any more strips, I have to do them now digitally.
Right.
So it was a bit. I was a bit like, oh my God, that's probably it now. I've done my art's finished. Although I can do other things like write and design, animation and stuff. But it's sort of that's that weird thing is you can't deny getting old. It's such a weird feeling,
But you've stalled it and you've reversed it potentially a bit as well, which is pretty.
You get good 10 years out of it. I'm just talking about not go blind.
That's what I mean. Yeah, I mean that's because that was a concern a year ago.
Christ, I don't think I could live if I went.
Well, I just think it seems so unfair. That's why I'm so pleased that it's been halted. You're a brilliant artist, and there's so many garbage artists who can see brilliantly. But
should be like Johnny Nemo and get an eye transplant. I suppose it'll eventually happen, won't it?
But I mean, the designing side of it is one of your fortes anyway. I mean, we're lucky that ambassadors. You've been involved in the designs for that stuff, which is amazing. Like, it's funny because we've been talking about the designs, and I was like, no, I know exactly who we should call. And it was just first pass. It's like, yeah, here it is. It's a weird skill you've got, but you've just got it.
When if you can do something, it's easy. Like you can write, so it's easy. You can do it. It's like Paul McCartney can write songs.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously somebody struggles, but they come out. So I can do that, and it's easy. It's like, I couldn't believe how easy it was to do like Mad Max. It was like, oh fuck it, I better keep it quiet. So easy compared to comics. Everything is easy compared to comics, basically.
What I love with Mad Max though is I think it almost felt like a Brendan McCarthy comic when it came out, didn't it? It felt the DNA was the same, wasn't it? Like you just felt like that was your home, wasn't it? Like when you were doing Mad Max 4. And you talked about it, I mean, for 20 years I heard about it, and it's so many different incarnations. I was so pleased that the final version was so brilliant and so regarded as well, which is great.
Yeah, that was to have shepherded it and got it out and it was good, rather than it was nice cinematography. To a shitty film, you have to say something complimentary. But it wasn't. It came out and went slap, 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 too Fast and Furious and all that stuff. Said the governor's back in town.
And funny, Ridley Scott had a great movie out about the same time as well. And it was so weird, like the two best movies out within those couple of months were like two octogenarians or something. I think it was did he have The Martian out about the same time or something? Something really good, But I mean, Mad Max was another level.
I pitched him a movie down at his place in West Hollywood.
Oh yeah?
I mean, when I've met a couple of these big directors, like David Lynch was great, and George Miller got really on really well to the point where we cooked up Mad Max.
Yeah.
Ridley, I didn't really connect with him. He's a bit irascible,
Yeah.
But, he was nice. He was pleasant. And I did say, first thing I said to him, Ridley, do you think you'll ever do any more sci-fi? Because Alien, you've done two of the greatest classics ever.
Yeah.
And he says, don't tell anybody, but I'm returning to the Alien franchise. This is like 10 years ago or something.
Right.
Oh, okay, yeah, So that was interesting. I had the hot scoop on that. But I pitched him a science fiction drama, which, to be fair, he listened to everything, and there was secretaries coming saying, "Ridley, you got this meeting," and he goes, "Wait. So what happens next?" So he was like, he was into it, and he wanted to know what happens next. What happens next? Yeah. Like
That's
that.
good.
But he gave, I was there for about an hour with him, just chatting and stuff, and then pitched in this sci-fi thing, and but he did go for it. It wasn't, I sensed, it wasn't different enough.
Right.
That was, it was kind of, a bit cyber and a bit all that stuff. So I think he probably gets pitched 300 of those a day, So, but David Lynch was great though, meeting him.
I never knew you met Lynch. That's amazing. So what period in Lynch's career?
That was when he couldn't get arrested period.
Right.
Where he just,
Yeah.
nobody was interested.
Yeah.
And it was around the time of, it was before he did not Inland Empire. What was that? The good one he did.
Mulholland Drive?
No, before that as well. The one with Rosette Arquette or something, whatever her name is. Patricia Arquette, that's it.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, it was around that time. And he had written an animated feature film, right? And his producer, I'd met his producer in Hollywood for some reason, and he said, "Would you come and talk to David about how to put together an animated film? Because he doesn't know whether to do it stop frame or computer animation or whatever." So I said, "Sure, okay, yeah." And I thought, "Great, I'll meet David Lynch." So he lives in the Hollywood Hills, and he's got this house, and he's got another house next to it, and another one next to it. It's 3 houses, and he has one where he meets people, and he's got his screening room and all that stuff. He's got his house where he does all his paintings, and it's his studio type private place, and then he's got his house where he lives.
Right.
And so I met him in his the house where he meets people, the screening room stuff, and he's exactly the same as he is. If you see him interviewed, why? No way. He's almost like David Lynch. He's just literally David Lynch. And he's got his grey shirt on, buttoned up at the thing, and for some reason he's got all this gaffer tape up to his arm. The whole bit on his shirt. Right?
Yeah.
So he must have torn his shirt and then repaired it with gaffer. But we got on really well because I did painting at college, and he was a painted painting, and I was just talking about painting. He said, "Do you want to see my paintings?"
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah." So he takes me to the next house, and he's got these huge big canvases that have got loads of rotting meat stuck in them. They're really big impasto canvases, but there's all this meat stuffed in them. And all the meat has kind of got, there's the ones that are less corrupt have still got a few maggots and things in them moving. And it's just loads of desiccated old meat and stuff in his thing. Because he likes the process of decay. He says it's as beautiful as the process of growth, because he says it's just normal. It's just that we have a revulsion because it's our own fate,
Yes. Yeah.
And so got on really well with him. And he's very funny. And, just... What I noticed about Hollywood is I get on with all the creative people.
Yes.
And if I meet those producer accountant-y type people, I feel like I'm dealing with an alien. I don't know what they're about or anything. They don't get me. I don't get them.
See, it's funny. I actually quite like it the other way around, which is strange. Like, I quite like the straightforwardness of the business guys. Like, it's just, if something works, they're happy. If something doesn't work, they're not happy. It's if the numbers are good and the numbers are bad, it's like the relationship is simple. Where the creative is a little more unpredictable, isn't it? I think it's. I enjoy both, but I sort of a night out with the business guys weirdly is I find it quite fun,
Yeah, I find it's only unfortunately had situations where I've had to deal with business people who start taking creative decisions.
Oh, yeah, that's a nightmare. Yeah.
And they can't. You give them here's a load of shit and here's a good thing, and they'll always pick. And you just think,
No, I mean more the legal guys and all that. That kind of thing. I sort of weirdly kind of get on with a lot of these guys. But like I know what you mean. Yeah, like there's nothing worse than an exec who's a failed writer or a failed actor. Coming to give you advice.
I'm not particularly sort of that interested or focused on that. A bit I am. I'm a bit savvy, but not to your degree. But anyway, that was Hollywood.
I didn't know you'd met Lynch. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really. He was very interesting and similar. He's just the same as he is in normal life.
What fascinated me with Lynch recently is quite recently I watched not the remake, the sequel to Twin Peaks.
Oh, did
The
you?
one he did just a couple of years back.
Yeah, episode 8 was the one, wasn't it?
I loved it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. But what I thought was amazing was what was regarded as really, really out there. Like people were like, what the hell is this about in 1990?
Yeah, right.
Is now just so sort of standard, isn't it? I realised how much we've all changed as a culture.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
Twin Peaks is now like watching Dallas. You know, it's like people can just accept this kind of thing, isn't it? Like, who would have guessed that grannies are going to see films with the multiverse in it? I mean, that's unthinkable, isn't it?
Did you? The only thing about that new Twin Peaks is that I did find, stuff like the bit where he loses his mind and he's Dougie. That I felt like it just went on and on and on. It felt like a gag that was past its humor date and just kept stuff like that. I would probably find it difficult to sit through that stuff again.
I know. I watched it on a plane, and you've got that weird heightened reality because of the air supply. So I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen, because I was drinking wine and watching Twin Peaks 20,000 feet in the air.
Yeah, there's some very good stuff. All that, the well is up the water, the old tramps where he's rubbing all the black stuff in the he's good at creating surreal rituals that you think, what's that about? There's something a bit unnerving about it,
There's a surprising number of directors who were painters, though. I worked with Tony Scott briefly, and Tony did 8 years at art college.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he loved painting. And do you know he storyboarded all his own films? He storyboarded it himself. So
yeah, both of those guys are good artists. Ridley Scott's a good artist.
Yeah.
A lot. I didn't realize how much of Alien he actually created. I thought it was all Giger, but he actually, the gunner inside this ship in Alien 1. That was Ridley Scott created all that, and then he got Giger to build it.
Really?
Give it to Giger.
I thought it was entirely
drawn by Ridley Scott.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Somebody told me
at the Royal College of Art around the time of David Hockney, same time.
Right. That's amazing. I didn't know that. Because Geiger's kind of got the rep for that, hasn't he? Like everybody always talks about Geiger's Alien.
Well, I mean, it's Geiger's vision, but Ridley Scott directed it, and because he can draw, he got him to build that.
Right.
That distinctive stuff.
Yeah.
I think Geiger probably. I would think just from the design of it, Geiger would have designed the spaceship, because it looked like a vulva, that kind of, all that psychosexual stuff he does.
Did I tell you one of my friends was up at Geiger's house before he died? One of my friends went to visit him, and for some book he was doing, I think, and he had two houses similar to David Lynch, and he had a wife in one house and a wife in the other house, kind of thing. It was like some kind of arrangement that he had, and he had a mini train that would travel around in this circuit between the two houses, and he would send messages from one relationship to the other relationship and sit on the train and travel back to the other house.
I like one of those little toy trains.
Yeah, like a toy train.
The old men.
That's when you're making too much dough, isn't it? When you build your toy train set, and travel between your two houses.
They're quite interesting, though. Those they're not. I suppose is that what they call them? Toy trains, where you get an actual human guy driving them, like when you go to a fun fair.
Yeah,
local green.
There's like a little miniature train with 3 carriages, and you get about 10.
Yeah, and it's got an engine. He's got to put. Yeah, is that what they call toy trains? Are they? I didn't know.
That's what I've always called them. Yeah. Because it was a thing in country estates to actually get one of those. It was a status thing, that you would have one of those going around your grounds and everything as well. So
that's our job, isn't it?
Well, listen, I better shut off.
Hey, what's the time? It's probably
10 o'clock. This is the longest one we've done, but the best one, absolutely brilliant. I think there's literally nothing we haven't covered, which is great,
Right.
And this will save us typing it all up by email in the morning. This is so much easier, isn't it?
We didn't get into Cliff High's latest theory about time or whatever it was. His latest.
That should be a big recommendation to people. Actually, is Cliff High. Anybody who's not checked out Cliff High, but
if you like a bit of far out mind expanding craziness, that's why I like the fact that he admits that he's a schizophrenic. And you're hearing somebody who's thinking in completely different tracks of thought, and I love how all his predictions never come true.
And he says them with such certainty. That's what I love. He
says this is going to happen that by this date, and it never happens.
And because these guys never give a date, generally you take it really seriously when Cliff gives a date, you know. So I was when he said he'll say with such certainty, well, the dollar is going to collapse in August, of course, you know. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to move my cash out into some, you know. It's but it never happens, doesn't it? Nothing ever happens. And he was talking. The one I really believed was he said in Antarctica, there's going to be like a massive discovery that's going to revolutionize everything we know about human history, and that's going to happen probably about the middle of March, you know. And it never happens, you know.
No.
But he's so bold that he doesn't even apologize. He just keeps going, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah. But I like the fact that he admits to schizophrenia and massive use of psychedelics, and that you don't know what he's saying. Is it completely crazy, or is it? But somehow there's a kind of truth in it as well, isn't there? You know,
I listen to him every time. You know, he does about 2 or 3 a week. You know, who else are you listening to then before we go? Who else do you recommend? And,
well, I dip into that guy Archaics, although I don't buy his Sky Canopy Reset thing. I listen to a bit of him. I go on to Leak Project because he has loads of different guests. Fireside Chats, I think you get some good ones on there. I like Secret Sun. Chris Knowles is really good.
Who's Fireside Chats? I haven't heard that one.
Fireside Chats.
Oh, Fireside Chats, right.
Fireside Chats. Yeah, I mean, he gets guests that I'm not interested in sometimes, but he does get interesting. There's some really good stuff as well. That's sort of, they're the ones off the top of my head, you know. Then random ones, I'll just scour the nether regions of the internet and see what's out there, you know. Just, do you think, oh, what's this guy about? Oh, rubbish. All right, get off it. And
you'll always send me up a link to something I've never seen before, which I love, though. You know, it's great.
Well, I just think this, you know, you're always looking for something far out and freaky. So anyway, I find, you know, being put in a certain change of mind by listening to somebody, you get interesting ideas from it. You can then go, that's a good idea for a story, or that's a
even I think it's exercise for your mind, isn't it? It's like a workout. So even if it's not something you're going to use, it's pushing your brain in a way that it doesn't normally go. So something interesting pops out later, doesn't it? I think. Like I do find when I'm working on something, it is the result of something that's happened even subconsciously, you know, 6 months before or whatever, you know, and you only get out of your head what you put into it, don't you?
I mean, that's why I'm constantly sort of aggregate reading, as they call it, you know, just pulling in from all sorts, you know. I mean, I mean, I haven't had a television for 30 years. I don't read newspapers, but I roughly know what's going on in the world, but I don't have to subject myself to the constant propaganda, which is getting too annoying. So I prefer aggregate reading, where I will look at, say, you know, a feed on Twitter that's legitimate, say, like The Spectator, or The New Statesman or something. But I'll also look at, you know, listen to Cliff High, then I'll listen to some crazy person that I've never heard of on the internet, what they've got to say. And you sort of somehow synthesize it all into, that's probably roughly what's going on, you know.
Most people, I think, just pick something they agree with already and then stick with that narrative their whole life, whether it's left or right, don't they? And the other side is the baddies, you know. So you've got that Ozymandias approach, isn't it, where you've basically got all the screens in front of you and you're synthesizing.
Well, if I get too into something, like I really studied COVID closely when it was going on. I mean, I've been in the media for 40 years, so I could smell when a number's being done. I just thought, okay, this ain't not right about this. And although I'm prone to, you know, distrusting authority and despise authoritarians, while I was reading like stuff that debunked COVID, I was also then would go on to say debunk the funk, this young professor guy who then debunks the conspiracy theories. I'm sort of debunking both sides all the time, you know.
Well, I've got conspiracy pals. I mean, I'm, as you are, plugged into that network quite a bit. And a lot of friends of mine literally believe every conspiracy, right? And I'll say to them, but look, they can't, even the ones that contradict each other, one of them must be wrong. So, for example, global depopulation, which was a huge thing people were talking about 18 months ago. Like, why would you want to microchip everyone and kill everyone? Only one of these things is real, if any, you know? So, like, I think you're pretty good for that, though. I think you're pretty discerning, aren't you? You can kind of spot, okay, this is nonsense.
Well, I think you get a nose for it if you've been doing, you know, I've been into all this for 40, 50 years, you know. I mean, years ago, it was all part of the counterculture. Conspiracy was counterculture stuff because it kind of got going really around JFK. And that led to Maeve Brussel. She was really amazing. And but you could only get transcripts of her stuff, and you could only get them in America. So the first time I went to Hollywood, I made my way down to this bookshop called Midnight Special down in Santa Monica, when Santa Monica was a shithole.
Yeah.
And before they did it all up. And there's this amazing bookshop, and it was full of stuff on the CIA, you know, clues, you know, but it had all transcripts of the Maeve Brussels show, this radio show, where she dug into all sorts of stuff. And another thing called The Matrix by a guy called Val Valerian. He used to photocopy these huge, thick wads of, he'd go into stuff like all this stuff coming out now about, you know, Morgellons disease and nanotechnology, how it interfaces with biological parts of the brain, and how you can integrate silicon and biological structures. All these patents, he'd comb the patent office and print the patents and then offer speculation on how it can be used. This is like going back 30 years ago, and you're seeing it all now coming out, you know?
Yeah.
Very interesting, all that stuff.
It's funny, I don't know if you know this. I was sitting beside an intelligence officer about a year ago at a dinner, right? And this guy told me the most amazing thing, and this is the conspiracy theory, is he told me that back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I don't know if it's done now, but certainly in the past, because I guess you get the internet now, you could do it with, they would plant books in libraries. Have you heard about this?
No.
So like your 133 books, for example, a lot of them would have something that's been put in by the intelligence services to look for potential troublemakers.
Oh, right.
And
So
whoever took out that book, it was put, because everybody's looking along at cookery book, and then the anarchist cookbook, you know.
All right.
Whoever took that out would go on a list, and they'd go on a watch list. So like, things were planted, which is pretty clever, isn't it? You know, so you're spotting who are the 5 people in the community who you should keep a wee eye on, you know.
Yeah, but my thing is, you know, not to have a mohawk, and I just move through the herd quietly.
Yeah,
you know, I'd rather just, that's why I don't engage in all those woke people and all that. Because I think, do I actually want, you know, no, I don't want I don't want anything to do with them.
Yes.
So I'd rather just be under the radar and move around and do what I want and observe stuff, rather than be attracting loads of crap at myself, because I can't be, that's not what I want to do.
Well, I remember I used to go to animal rights marches when I was a teenager, and I was the only guy who didn't get any hassle for the police, because I just dressed like a bank guy or something like that. You know, like I look like a farmer. You know, it's like I don't look as if I'm an anarchist or anything like that. So it buys you a lot of cred, though, doesn't it? You know, like if you look kind of normal, you can get away with things that if you draw, the police decide they hate somebody sometimes immediately, don't they? Just by the look of them.
I prefer anonymity and invisibility to. I mean, I had a brief brush with, you know, small. I could have got a bit more famous if I wanted. There was a period when comics were hip and everything was going on, and I was this and that. And some guy recognized me in a supermarket. He said, "Oh, you Brendan McCarthy? Oh, really?" And I sort of, you know, pleasantly, yeah, okay. And I thought, right, no, that's not happening. I'm not going to have anonymity, you know, violated. So I think anonymity is the new celebrity, personally.
Well, Alan Moore talked about that. He said it was interesting that you, in the confines of a comic convention.
He had it bad, though, for a while, didn't he?
But he was saying you're massive, right? But then you go across the road and you buy a bag of chips, and nobody cares who you are. So comics is quite a nice fame, isn't it? That people absolutely love seeing you, you know, but you step outside the door and it's literally nothing, you know?
Yeah, if you want it, fine, go for it. But I personally, that doesn't suit my personality. I'd rather be an observer of things and as I say, move through the herd without drawing attention.
Yeah. That's a wise way to be, you know, because there is always a downside, you know, when you meet properly famous people, as we do, you know, like their lives aren't lives you would especially want. And then, you know, they have to live with that forever, even when they don't have the cash a little bit later and everything. It could be hard, you know. I remember Margot Kidder saying that she was pawning her rings one time, like she was so broke in the 90s. She hadn't had work for a long time. She was pawning her rings, and the guy in the pawnbrokers couldn't believe she was in there and got her autograph and everything. And that just sums up, you know, what you don't want to happen, isn't it? To have the fame and no backup, you know, no cash and everything must be difficult.
I mean, my heart used to break when I used to read reports of the tragic story of Terry Thomas. This old guy, completely broke, living on charity of fellow actors and you know, that sort of stuff. And I think, oh God.
You want to be Stan Lee when you're 97, still having a great time, loving the conventions and, you know, partying.
what a phenomenon that guy was, isn't he? I mean, although, everybody had an issue about him taking all the credit, other than that, he was amazing. He was really fantastic and did so much for the industry. He talked it up because people like Ditko, Stevie Ditko couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Nobody could. Ditko's okay, but he's not like Stan Lee knew how to charm and do the media.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched Stan on things like Dick Cavett and those kind of 70s shows that he would go on, and he was so charming, and he looked great, he was a brilliant ambassador for comics, wasn't he? And what's interesting is that this 70 years or so that comics has been sort of a thing, that people are aware of, the characters and everything. There's been nobody even can touch the hem of his cape, isn't there? Like Stan's so far ahead of everybody else. He's like Calvin Klein. He's the brand name. Like even Alan Moore, Frank Miller, and those guys, like they've never become a cultural phenomenon like Stan did. He's like Walt Disney, really, isn't he?
But also he liked it, didn't he? He enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna watch Clarkson's Farm and then get to bed. That's my plan.
You watching Last of Us? Do you bother with that?
I'm not that interested in zombies. Like all that sort of zombie stuff doesn't really.
It's actually quite a nice show. It's quite well made and it's dramatic.
I've seen a lot of it. That is it different from Walking Dead? I mean, is it not?
It's similar to the first season of Walking Dead, which was probably the best bit of Walking Dead was around that stuff because that really went off the boil. But, anyway, all right, mate. It's good to chat.
Great to see you, and I'll see you soon, I hope. Probably email you in the morning.
All right, okay.
See you soon, Brendan. Good night, then.
Right. Cheers.
Hey, folks, hope you enjoyed the interview. Just to remind you, that's Nightclub Issue 3, Magic Order Issue 2, and Nemesis Reloaded Issue 2, all on sale in February. Look forward to catching you next week. All the best then.